In 1992, fate led 23-year-old Krista to the city of Tulsa, Oklahoma. The young single mother relocated there with her 3-year-old son, Joshua, in search of a new life. Almost immediately after the move, Krista secured a position as a leasing agent in a residential complex. It was there that she encountered a meeting that would alter the course of her life. Working in the same complex was 22-year-old Joe Kidd, an instructor at the local fitness center. The two young individuals quickly found common ground, and soon their professional relationship blossomed into a romantic one. Particularly significant for Krista was Joe's acceptance of her son as his own, fostering a genuine family atmosphere. After some time, the couple began living together, eventually marrying and forming a typical American family. A pivotal figure in their lives was Joe's father, affectionately known as Grandpa Dusty. He became a second father to the children, devoting much attention to his grandchildren. 3 years into their life together, Krista became pregnant. On December 5, 1996, just a week before Krista's birthday and a month before Christmas, their daughter Lauren was born. For Krista, the birth of her daughter was the most wonderful gift of the season. The family was tightly knit, and Lauren's arrival further solidified their bonds. However, in 1999, the family faced a serious challenge. Joe lost his job due to downsizing. For an extended period, he struggled to find new employment, and the family relied on sporadic earnings. To secure stable work, they were compelled to relocate to Phoenix, Arizona. Although this 1,500-kilometer journey was an adventure for the couple, it posed a significant trial for the entire family. They had never seen mountains before, and now they found themselves at their foothills, which particularly amazed little Lauren. The girl grew up active and fearless, loving to sing and regularly engaging in sports. At the age of 4, she developed a passion for soccer and enjoyed playing as a goalkeeper. Despite the challenges, the Kidd family managed to maintain warm relationships and mutual support, laying a strong foundation for their children's future. These early years shaped Lauren's character and molded her into the person she would become. Life continued to evolve for the family. When Lauren started school, Krista became pregnant again. By the time the new child was born, circumstances had changed, prompting the family to return to Oklahoma to be closer to Joe's parents and receive the necessary support. Managing 3 children alone would prove to be significantly more challenging. The year 2009 marked a turning point in Lauren's life. At 13, she entered a tumultuous adolescent phase. Alongside typical puberty issues, she faced mental health challenges. Concerned, her parents took their only daughter for a medical evaluation, where she was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. This condition affected her ability to concentrate and control certain impulses. Lauren was prescribed medication intended to alleviate her symptoms, but instead, it exacerbated the situation. The girl became withdrawn and silent, distancing herself from friends and family. The situation was further complicated by the outbreak of swine flu, which, albeit on a smaller scale, echoed the COVID-19 pandemic. During this time, the beloved grandfather of the family contracted the virus and passed away, a devastating blow for all relatives, especially the children who were very close to him. Following this event, Lauren began to exhibit new problems. She started self-harming. Until that point, Krista had been maintaining a family video diary filled with joyful moments. However, from then on, the cheerful and carefree videos took on a more somber tone. As her daughter began to inflict harm upon herself, Krista recorded videos over several days, trying to understand if new injuries were appearing. Krista struggled to comprehend what was happening and why her daughter's condition was deteriorating. Lauren would shut down whenever uncomfortable topics arose and refused to engage. After some time, relatives discovered the true reason for the teenager's alienation. It turned out that Lauren had recently fallen in with a new group of friends. One day, she found herself alone with an unfamiliar peer who coerced her into sexual acts. This had a devastating impact on Lauren's psyche. The girl was too afraid to confide in her parents, but when the truth came to light, she was able to seek help. Lauren began attending therapy sessions and taking prescribed medication. Over the next few years, her mental state stabilized. She became sociable and friendly once more, forging new friendships. In 2012, Lauren met Zach Romaine. The teenagers quickly became friends and began spending all their free time together. They even bore a striking resemblance to one another. Lauren's family welcomed Zach with open arms, as he seemed to be a kind and decent young man. For the younger children in the family, Zach became like an older brother. The young couple officially announced their relationship in February of that year, when they both turned 16. Around the middle of the school year, Lauren decided to move in with her boyfriend, leaving her parents' home. They aspired to rent an apartment, marry, and live as a fully independent family. Lauren's parents did not share her enthusiasm for the idea of cohabitation with Zach, believing they were too young for such a serious step. However, they chose not to impede their daughter's independence, fearing it might damage their relationship and provoke a new wave of depression and self-destructive behavior. At the same time, they were concerned that Lauren might neglect her studies due to the relationship. Nevertheless, their daughter assured them that this would not happen, ultimately gaining their consent. Shortly after the move, Krista, Lauren's mother, suspected that her daughter might be pregnant, which was the reason for the haste in their decision to live together and marry. When directly asked, Lauren replied that she was uncertain. Krista then took her to the hospital for a pregnancy test, which turned out to be positive. Although the news of the early pregnancy came as a surprise to the family, everyone supported Lauren and eagerly anticipated the arrival of the child. On March 22, 2015, 19-year-old Lauren gave birth to a daughter, Addison Maine. Zach's parents also embraced the news enthusiastically, willingly stepping into the roles of grandparents without any judgment towards the young couple. Contrary to the relatives' concerns, Lauren managed to complete her high school education just a few months after giving birth, and on July 16, 2016, she officially married Zach, after which the couple embarked on a honeymoon to Branson, Missouri. Outwardly, the couple appeared happy, but in reality, Lauren had been battling inner demons for years. The emotional wounds from her past continued to inflict pain, albeit less acutely, as she hinted in her social media posts. Simultaneously, Lauren was determined to fight for her loved ones and her daughter. Zach found employment to support his family, although initially, significant assistance came from both sets of parents. However, by October 2016, the situation had changed. In her posts, Lauren noted how challenging it was for her to be home alone with the child, lamenting the monotony and boredom of daily life, yearning to return to work as soon as possible. Despite her boundless love for her daughter, the young mother craved self-fulfillment. During this time, the couple decided to improve their living conditions. They proposed to their longtime friends, Connor Browner and his girlfriend, Alexandra Finley, to co-rent a more spacious apartment, sharing the expenses. This arrangement would allow them to save money and comfortably accommodate their children. Soon, the two families moved in together. Initially, cohabitation was harmonious and joyful. Everyone supported one another, socializing and spending time together. On May 25, 2017, Lauren finally secured a job as a sales associate in a store, seeking greater independence. At the same time, she continued to grapple with depression, which she confided to her mother. Lauren dyed her hair dark, wore black clothing, and applied heavy makeup. Her relationship with Zach deteriorated against the backdrop of her overall psychological state. The couple of friends with whom they shared the apartment separated and moved out. Zach, Lauren, and their daughter found themselves alone again, suffering from boredom. After a few months, their marriage began to unravel. Zach returned to his mother, attempting to alleviate the tense atmosphere, but to no avail. The couple could not rekindle their closeness, even for the sake of their child, and that same year, they filed for divorce. Interestingly, after the official separation, the former partners briefly improved their relationship, but it was short-lived. Consequently, they soon decided to make radical changes in their personal lives. Left alone with the child, Lauren acutely felt loneliness and the absence of male support. She yearned for new love, and it came rather swiftly. Lauren began a relationship with Connor, their former apartment neighbor. Their shared experience of breaking up with their partners brought Lauren and Connor closer, igniting romantic feelings between them. This news deeply saddened Zach, who still harbored hopes of family reconciliation. However, he had to come to terms with his ex-wife's choice. By September 2017, the divorce proceedings were finalized. The parents agreed to share custody of their 2-year-old daughter, taking turns caring for her each week. This decision was satisfactory to all parties involved. Zach's animosity towards Connor intensified due to his dependence on illicit substances. Gradually, Lauren also began to smoke marijuana. Their apartment increasingly became a venue for raucous parties, much to the dismay of little Addison's father. He attempted to influence his ex-wife, but to no avail. Conflicts between Zach and Lauren, as well as with her new partner, arose repeatedly. The girl's parents were shocked to learn that their daughter had traded her former husband for a boyfriend with a chaotic lifestyle. Nevertheless, they hoped that, in time, the young couple would settle down and perhaps restore their relationship. However, contrary to the relatives' expectations, the situation did not improve. A year passed, and by the autumn of 2018, Lauren's life was spiraling downward. During this period, she and Connor found themselves surrounded by a company that abused illicit substances. The young couple began to spend increasing amounts of time at parties. Additionally, Lauren befriended a new companion, Shauna, an extreme individual who often provoked dangerous situations. Lauren's parents were deeply concerned about these circumstances. It was during this time that a new profile of Lauren appeared on social media under the name of one of her alter egos. This was a depressive, gothic persona in dark tones, reflecting the girl's inner state. On her page, she frequently wrote about dissociative identity disorder, a condition in which a person's identity is fragmented, creating the impression that multiple distinct personalities coexist within one body. It seemed that Lauren identified for such sub-personalities within herself. Krista repeatedly attempted to reach out to the police regarding Connor's aggressive behavior, but Lauren refused to file any reports. Their toxic relationship persisted despite the evident signs of danger and concern from loved ones. The situation grew increasingly tense, yet no one could foresee how tragically it would culminate. On October 26, 2018, Lauren was scheduled to meet her mother to celebrate her brother's birthday, but instead of a pleasant family gathering, she faced a serious conversation. Krista expressed her worries about her daughter's lifestyle but was unable to reach her. The dialogue escalated into a heated argument, after which Lauren turned, slammed the door, and left. This was the last time her family saw her alive. The following evening, Blake, a friend of Lauren's, called Krista. He had arranged to give Lauren a ride to a friend's house so they could prepare for Halloween together, but he could not find her. This alarmed him, prompting him to contact her mother. Blake recounted that he had met with Lauren the previous evening and had driven her to the nearest gas station. There, Lauren asked to be dropped off, explaining that she was meeting tattoo artist Mike West. They were collaborating on the design of a new tattoo that she planned to get that same day at his home. According to Blake, he had kept in touch with Lauren until the evening. She had shared details about the tattoo, but then suddenly stopped responding to messages and calls. This surprised Blake, as Lauren typically never let go of her phone. Upon receiving this information, Krista panicked and wrote to her ex-son-in-law Zach and Lauren's current boyfriend Connor. Zach confirmed that Lauren had not shown up to pick up their daughter, although she had intended to do so. This news further alarmed the relatives. The police quickly located Mike West, the tattoo artist mentioned by Blake. Mike confirmed that he had picked up Lauren from the gas station that evening and brought her to his home, where they were supposed to finish working on a tattoo sketch before proceeding with the inking. The man also reported that Connor unexpectedly joined them later. Lauren assured them that everything was fine and asked for permission to step out with him for a short while. However, after that, she never returned, even though Mike waited for her all evening. The next step for the detectives was to speak with Connor, who appeared to be the last person to see Lauren before her disappearance. The young man stated that on the day Lauren was getting her tattoo, he drove her in his car to the nearest Walmart, where she was supposed to meet a friend. After that, Connor claimed he went about his own business. According to him, Lauren promised to call as soon as she was free, but she never did. Investigators noticed some discrepancies in Connor's account regarding the exact timing of events that day. They decided to scrutinize his statements more closely to ascertain what had truly happened to Lauren near the supermarket. To this end, the police requested surveillance footage from Walmart. Meanwhile, detectives also spoke with the mother of the missing girl, Krista. The woman revealed that her daughter's relationship with Connor was quite toxic, and she had initially opposed their association altogether. In recent months, the couple had been arguing more frequently, and the tension between them had only escalated. Krista also informed them that at the time of Lauren's disappearance, she and Connor had already broken up and were not together that day when he allegedly drove her to the supermarket. Lauren did not wish to continue the relationship and was avoiding meetings and communication with her ex-boyfriend. While reviewing the surveillance footage from the Walmart parking lot, the police were unable to spot Connor's vehicle. There was a possibility that he had simply parked in a blind spot, but Lauren was also nowhere to be seen inside the store. Detectives spent countless hours meticulously reviewing the video recordings but found no trace of the girl. More than 48 hours had passed since Lauren's disappearance, a critical period after which the chances of finding a missing person alive rapidly diminished. Relatives were increasingly losing hope. Photographs of the girl were disseminated in the media, and the police urged the public to assist in the search for the young mother. Suddenly, an anonymous witness called the police department's hotline. He stated that on the evening Lauren went missing, he saw Connor arrive at his residence in his car. There were noticeable bloodstains on the seats and floor mats, which the young man attempted to conceal by throwing covers over them, but this did not completely mask them. Upon receiving this information, detectives began to consider Connor as the primary suspect in the case. It emerged that the young man had previously encountered legal troubles due to a minor domestic dispute during which he resisted arrest. Less than a year before the breakup with Lauren, a serious altercation had occurred between them, prompting Lauren to call the authorities. However, she ultimately decided not to press charges, and the conflict was swept under the rug. With a search warrant in hand, the police were able to thoroughly inspect the vehicle of the main suspect. Inside, they discovered numerous traces of blood that someone had painstakingly attempted to remove. At that point, there was no doubt that this blood belonged to the missing Lauren. It appeared that Lauren had lost a significant amount of blood, making it impossible to completely eradicate the stains. Experts who examined the crime scene concluded that the victim had sustained a severe injury and most likely died from massive blood loss. Investigators meticulously collected biological samples and sent them for analysis. The results of the laboratory tests later confirmed the worst fears. The blood found indeed belonged to the missing Lauren. When Connor was presented with this evidence, he once again altered his testimony. This time, the suspect claimed that he had picked Lauren up from the supermarket, but she was accompanied by another girl who allegedly wanted to buy drugs from a friend. Something went awry, and this individual suddenly pulled out a gun and shot Lauren in the head. Instead of fleeing the scene, the assailant supposedly directed the weapon at Connor and ordered him to transport the body to the nearest location where it could be disposed of. According to Connor, he drove a little further and, at the armed stranger's instruction, discarded Lauren's lifeless body in a dumpster. Throughout this, Connor insisted on his innocence and non-involvement. This version of events sounded just as implausible and convoluted as the previous ones. After a thorough investigation, it was revealed that the dumpster Connor referred to was designated for cardboard recycling. A day after the murder, the contents of the dumpster were transported to a paper mill, where it was set to undergo the recycling process. The police urgently dispatched 30 personnel to inspect 72 sorting facilities servicing 19 waste recycling enterprises across 16 states. The detectives familiarized themselves with all stages of the paper waste recycling process. It involved several technological operations during which the body could be shredded into minute fragments. Theoretically, there were several points where remains could still be found, but the likelihood of this was exceedingly low, as the recycling lines were highly automated and few people worked there. With each passing hour of fruitless searches, the police increasingly realized that Lauren's remains had most likely already undergone the entire recycling cycle. To facilitate this extraordinarily complex task, it was decided to deploy canine units with service dogs trained to detect corpses by the distinctive scent of decomposition. This approach yielded results. After some time, the dogs were able to locate what remained of the once beautiful young woman: fragments of skin, bones, and internal organs, ground by the recycling equipment. DNA analysis officially confirmed that the discovered remains belonged to the missing Lauren. The recycling company immediately recalled 30 tons of paper produced the day before to prevent any human body parts from entering the final product. In January 2020, the case finally reached the courtroom. Connor never admitted his guilt, despite the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecution. He was confident that the jury would, at worst, find him guilty of involuntary manslaughter. However, the prosecution was just preparing to present the key evidence proving the intentional nature of the crime. The defense attorneys insisted that the fatal shot was fired accidentally. Yet, the prosecutors revealed the results of the analysis of the defendant's phone correspondence. It emerged that Connor's relationship with another girl preceded his breakup with Lauren. In messages to his lovers, he expressed extreme negativity towards his ex, referring to her as a parasite. He accused Lauren of allegedly ruining his life and not allowing him peace. In the same correspondence, Connor confessed that he was willing to do anything to rid himself of the bothersome ex-girlfriend, even murder. However, these claims contradicted the testimony of the victim's mother, who asserted that it was Connor who could not accept the breakup and stalked her daughter everywhere. After considering all the circumstances of the case, the jury found the defendant guilty of intentional murder. 23-year-old Connor Bronner was sentenced to life imprisonment. However, after 38 years and 3 months, he would be eligible to apply for parole. Following the announcement of the verdict, the victim's mother, Krista, stated that she would never forgive her daughter's killer. "We will never be able to come to terms with this loss. We have no one to bury. We don't even have a grave where we could go and remember Lauren," she told reporters after the trial. The loss of her daughter forever altered the lives of the Kidd family. Little Addison was left without a mother, and her grandparents were deprived of the opportunity to properly say goodbye to their daughter. Krista transformed Lauren's former room into a kind of memorial. She preserved the pink curtains, the piggy bank, stuffed animals, and the zebra-patterned bedspread. A special place is held by Lauren's beloved teddy bear, with which she had never parted in childhood. Now, this room has become a space where little Addison can feel a connection to her mother. Zach, Addison's father, continues to raise his daughter, striving to keep Lauren's memory alive. He tells the girl about her mother, shows her photographs and videos so that Addison knows what a wonderful person her mother was. The family holds annual memorial events in memory of Lauren, including the release of water lanterns adorned with her photographs and memories. The tragic story of Lauren Kidd serves as a poignant reminder of the dangers of toxic relationships and domestic violence. Her death prompted many women to re-evaluate their relationships and seek help when they find themselves in similar situations. Local organizations dedicated to protecting victims of domestic violence reported an increase in inquiries following the media coverage of this case. Halloween, once a cherished holiday for the family, is now forever intertwined with painful memories. Nevertheless, Lauren's loved ones strive to preserve the bright moments of her life, her smile, her love for music and sports, her devotion to family and her daughter. They believe that her story can help others avoid a similar fate. The tragic demise of Lauren Kidd left a profound mark on the life of Broken Arrow, a city previously regarded as one of the safest in Oklahoma. This case compelled many to reconsider their attitudes towards the issues of domestic violence and toxic relationships. Today, several years after the tragedy, Connor Bronner is serving his sentence at the North Fork Correctional Facility in Beckham County, Oklahoma. His first opportunity to apply for parole will not arise until 2056. Addison, Lauren's daughter, is growing up under the care of her father Zach and her grandparents, the Kids. The girl, as her relatives say, increasingly resembles her mother not only in appearance but also in character. The family is doing everything possible to keep Lauren's memory alive for her daughter. In honor of Lauren, a charitable foundation has been established to assist victims of domestic violence. The organization provides psychological support, legal advice, and temporary shelter for women in dangerous relationships. Each year, the foundation organizes a memorial run, with proceeds going to aid the affected. Krista Kidd has become an active advocate for the rights of domestic violence victims. She regularly speaks at schools and colleges, sharing her daughter's story as a cautionary tale for young people. Her efforts have helped advance several legislative initiatives aimed at strengthening protections for victims of violence. Every year on December 5th, Lauren's birthday, her family and friends gather to honor her memory. They release lanterns into the sky, sing her favorite songs, and share memories of the girl whose life was tragically cut short. The story of Lauren Kidd stands as a powerful reminder of the importance of recognizing the early signs of toxic relationships and seeking help in a timely manner. Her death was not in vain. It has saved the lives of many other women who found the strength to escape dangerous relationships after hearing her story.
A tranquil April evening in 2005 in the suburbs of Durham, North Carolina, was shattered by a frantic call to 911. A male voice, trembling with emotion, informed the dispatcher, "My wife, she isn't breathing." Initially, he claimed she had suffered gunshot wounds, though it later emerged that she had been stabbed. Thus began a tale that would not only shake the local community in the years to come but also captured the attention of the entire nation. Janet Christensen was born on June 19, 1979, in a small town in Virginia. She was the seventh of 10 children in a deeply religious Mormon family. From an early age, the girl's life was shaped by two powerful forces: a large, loving family and the strict religious traditions of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Janet distinguished herself among her peers. Not only was she an intelligent and diligent student, but she also exhibited remarkable athletic prowess. The girl successfully balanced her studies with basketball, soccer, and swimming. Her energy seemed boundless, allowing her to juggle training, academics, and the time spent with her numerous nieces and nephews. A defining trait of Janet's character was her openness to others. She effortlessly connected with both longtime acquaintances and strangers alike. Yet, she never wavered from her religious convictions, which formed the bedrock of her worldview. Janet dreamed of having a large family of her own, akin to the one in which she had been raised. Her academic achievements and athletic accomplishments did not go unnoticed. Upon graduating from high school, Janet was afforded the opportunity to continue her education at the University of Southern Virginia, where she became a member of the university's soccer team. This decision would later shape the course of her life, though at the time, she was unaware of its significance. At university, Janet emerged as a multifaceted individual. Despite a demanding schedule of classes and practices, she found time for an active social life. Her sincerity and kindness drew people to her, and soon she became the heart of any gathering. Nevertheless, she always remained mindful of her religious beliefs and moral principles, which guided her in all aspects of life. No one could have predicted that this vibrant, life-affirming young woman would become a victim of a brutal crime, and that her story would evolve into one of the most convoluted criminal cases in North Carolina. The year 1998 marked a turning point in Janet's life. During a soccer match at the University of Southern Virginia, she met Raven Abaroa, a player on the men's team. This encounter seemed perfect. The young man was also a Mormon and shared her religious views. He captivated Janet with tales of his missionary journey to Peru and his devotion to faith. It would later be revealed that these stories were fabrications. Raven did not even possess a passport. Their relationship developed rapidly. Raven presented himself as a considerate and caring suitor. For Janet, this was her first serious romance, and she fully immersed herself in the new relationship. Friends noted how much she had changed now. All her free time was devoted to Raven. Over the course of 2 years, their bond deepened. Raven skillfully crafted the image of the ideal partner for a religious girl from a conservative family. He attended church services, adhered to all necessary traditions, and made a favorable impression on Janet's family. In 2000, when Janet turned 20 and Raven was 19, he proposed to her. Despite their youth, no one in the family expressed doubts about this decision. After all, the young couple appeared to be a perfect match, united by shared values and faith. The wedding took place in August 2000 at a Mormon temple in Washington, D.C. It was a solemn ceremony that adhered to all religious canons. The newlyweds looked happy and confident about their future. No one present could foresee that behind the flawless facade of this marriage, troubling signs would soon begin to emerge. After the wedding, the couple settled in southeastern Virginia, where both found employment at a sporting goods store. This was a time when their lives seemed stable and promising. However, fate had a new twist in store for them. Both were offered better positions at a store branch in Durham, North Carolina. The decision to relocate was not made lightly. It meant leaving behind their familiar surroundings, friends, and family. Yet, the prospect of career advancement outweighed their hesitations. The young couple purchased a home in the suburbs of Durham and embarked on a new chapter of their lives, filled with hope and expectations. The facade of their perfect marriage began to crumble just a few years after their move to Durham. Although everything appeared to be going well on the surface, the young couple had stable jobs, a home of their own, and seemed happy. The reality was starkly different. The year 2003 proved to be a turning point in their relationship. Raven confessed to Janet about his numerous infidelities. He did not merely have one mistress. It turned out he was simultaneously involved with several women. Among them was 17-year-old Annabelle Haviza, with whom Raven spent time, using a separate phone SIM card to conceal his connections from his wife. The confession was accompanied by a declaration of his desire to leave the marriage. Raven even temporarily moved out, leaving Janet to grapple with this crisis alone. The situation was further complicated when, shortly after the revelations of his betrayals, Janet discovered she was pregnant. For a deeply religious woman, this was a profound trial. On one hand, her faith disapproved of divorce. On the other, the prospect of single motherhood was daunting. Janet found herself in a difficult position. She still loved her husband but could no longer trust him. During this period, support came from unexpected sources. Neighbors with whom Janet had formed friendships in Durham. They not only provided her with moral support but also attempted to influence Raven, urging him to change his behavior and remain faithful to his pregnant wife. Under pressure from those around him and perhaps feeling a sense of responsibility for the impending child, Raven returned home. He promised Janet that he would never betray her again. Hopeful for a better future and guided by her religious convictions, she decided to give their marriage a second chance. However, the atmosphere in the family would never return to what it once was. Janet tried to live day by day, never knowing what to expect from her husband. The only solace for her was the impending arrival of her child and the dreams of motherhood she had always cherished. On October 17, 2004, a son, Caden, was born into the Abaroa family. His arrival was a ray of light in a complicated situation. Janet devoted herself entirely to motherhood, finding in it her calling and solace. For her, her son became the center of her universe, and it was through him that she found the strength to move forward. Yet, the joy of motherhood was overshadowed by persistent financial troubles. The young family struggled to make ends meet. The situation was so dire that their landlord, understanding the family's plight with a newborn, granted them a 2-month extension on their rent. The church community also extended a helping hand. The couple received a personal loan from the church. This was an important support, but it did not resolve all their issues. Janet and Raven continued to work at the sporting goods store, striving to meet the family's basic needs. During this time, Janet began to notice troubling changes in her husband's behavior. Later, her best friend would testify that Janet suspected Raven of having mental health issues due to his sudden mood swings and aggression. Even during calm periods, she constantly awaited the re-emergence of his darker side. Despite everything, Janet endeavored to create a stable and happy environment for her son. She enrolled Caden in preschool, established a daily routine, and sought to maintain a cozy atmosphere at home. Her dedication to motherhood and care for her child inspired admiration in all who knew her. However, beneath the facade of a well-ordered household lay serious problems. In her last conversation with her best friend, which took place on the day of her murder, Janet evaded direct questions about whether Raven treated her well. Instead, she consistently redirected the conversation to Caden, as if trying to shield him from the troubling reality. December 2004 marked the onset of a rapid decline for the Abaroa family. When Caden was merely 2 months old, Raven was arrested for shoplifting at the store where the couple worked. The investigation revealed that he had embezzled goods worth over $9,000. He operated methodically, ordering athletic shoes, arranging for their delivery to their home address, and subsequently selling them online under the alias Footballer Guy. The scheme unraveled when the supplier contacted the company regarding unpaid merchandise. A verification of the delivery addresses swiftly led to Raven. He was promptly dismissed, and the case was referred to the courts. Although Janet was not involved in the thefts, she also left her job due to shame and humiliation. Raven managed to evade prison time. He was sentenced to 2 years of probation and ordered to pay restitution of nearly $10,000. For a family already in dire financial straits, this became an additional burden. Finding new employment with a criminal record proved to be a daunting challenge. In early 2005, Janet learned of her second pregnancy. She confided this news only to her closest friends, including Katie Chick. According to her testimony, Janet was exceedingly anxious. Not because she did not desire a second child, on the contrary, she dreamed of a large family, but rather due to her concerns about Raven's potential reaction, given their precarious financial situation. During this period, Raven took a step that would later raise many questions for investigators. He took out a life insurance policy on Janet for $500,000. Despite their severe financial difficulties, he consistently paid the premiums. This decision seemed peculiar, especially considering that the couple had not previously held such insurance policies. Tensions within the family escalated. Janet increasingly complained to her friends about her husband's aggressive behavior. She feared his sudden outbursts of anger and unpredictable reactions. Nevertheless, loyal to her religious convictions and thinking of the children, she clung to her marriage. April 26, 2005, began like any other day. Janet picked up Caden from daycare and returned home. In the evening, the couple was scheduled to meet with a member of their church community. After the meeting, they returned home, and around 8:30 p.m., Raven prepared to leave for a football match in Morrisville. According to Raven, when he left the house, Janet was getting ready for bed. However, this detail would later become one of the key elements of the investigation. Before departing, Raven did something unusual. He locked the 2 household dogs in the shed. This was out of character, as the dogs always slept indoors, in special crates under the kitchen table. Janet, who often found herself home alone, valued the presence of the dogs. They provided her with a sense of security. Neighbors reported that the evening was quiet. No suspicious sounds or cries were heard. Around 10:00 p.m., Raven returned home. He claimed that the house was dark and silent. Ascending to the second floor, he discovered Janet lying on the floor in an unnatural position. In a call to 911, Raven was in a state of panic. He reported that his wife was not breathing and initially claimed to see gunshot wounds. When paramedics arrived, they found that Janet had died from multiple stab wounds. 6-month-old Caden was unharmed in his crib in the adjacent room. An autopsy revealed that Janet had sustained 3 deep stab wounds. One was on her left arm, a typical defensive wound. The second was to her chest, while the fatal blow was to her neck, severing an artery. The coroner also confirmed Janet's second pregnancy, a fact known only to a few of her closest friends. There were no signs of struggle or forced entry at the crime scene. Only Raven's laptop and a few kitchen knives were missing from the house. Janet's wedding ring and other jewelry remained untouched on her vanity. Everything indicated that the victim knew her assailant or willingly let him into the home. The Durham police immediately launched an investigation. Crucial evidence was discovered at the crime scene: a bloody shoe print, a fingerprint, and traces of blood. Detectives noted several suspicious details: the absence of signs of a break-in, the disappearance of only the laptop and knives, and the dogs locked in the shed. Initially, Raven cooperated actively with the investigation, but his behavior raised suspicions. He informed Janet's family of her death, asserting that she had committed suicide, a version that sharply contrasted with the evidence uncovered. The Christensen family categorically rejected the possibility of suicide, knowing Janet's deep religious faith and her devotion to her son. A few days after the murder, Raven took a step that further alarmed investigators. He packed his belongings, took Caden, and moved to Utah, where his family resided. Moreover, he sought to claim the insurance payout even before Janet's funeral. Investigators discovered that the day before the murder, April 25, Raven had backed up all the data from his laptop onto CDs. Janet's sister, Sonia, found these discs while sorting through belongings. This seemed a curious coincidence. Just a day before the laptop was stolen, the owner had preserved all vital information. However, there were also contradictory elements in the case. The shoe print found at the crime scene did not match Raven's footwear. The bloody fingerprint also did not belong to him. Additionally, he had an alibi. Several witnesses confirmed his presence at the football match during the time of the alleged murder. The investigation was complicated by inconsistencies in Raven's own statements. In conversations with the police, he claimed to have found Janet already dead. However, to church community member Michael Guzman, he recounted a different version. Allegedly, when he found his wife, she was still alive, and asked him, "Why does it hurt so much?" In Salt Lake City, Utah, Raven began to construct a new life. Having received the $500,000 insurance payout, he settled with his son in the new city. Soon, he met Vanessa Pond, a single mother whose daughter attended the same daycare as Caden. Raven proved to be a persistent suitor. Initially, Vanessa, who had raised her child alone for 5 years, was not interested in a relationship. However, the charismatic Raven managed to win her trust. He told her that his wife had died but avoided details. Vanessa, enchanted by his attention and care for her son, did not press for specifics. Janet's family, closely monitoring Raven's life, learned of his new relationship and attempted to warn Vanessa. They reached out to her and shared the truth about Janet's violent death and Raven's status as the prime suspect. However, Vanessa, already emotionally attached to Raven, believed his version that the police and Janet's family were unjustly pursuing him. Raven assured Vanessa that he was actively cooperating with the investigation and seeking to find the true murderer. In reality, he ignored police inquiries and did not participate in the search for the criminal. He never offered a reward for information about the murderer and did not organize any memorial events for Janet. In the summer of 2008, 3 years after Janet's death, Raven and Vanessa married. However, the honeymoon revealed troubling signs. According to Vanessa, during their wedding trip, a drunken Raven constantly spoke of Janet's death, repeating that he was very angry. He never expressed sorrow or grief, instead promising Vanessa, "I will never hurt you." Raven's second marriage quickly began to mirror the patterns of the first. Vanessa became a victim of his sudden outbursts of anger and emotional abuse. As with Janet, Raven could swiftly transition from rage to feigned remorse, from cruel words to apologies. The turning point came on Christmas Eve 2008. During an argument, Raven locked Vanessa in the bathroom, threatened her, and declared that he hated her and did not care if she died. Following this, he seized Caden and stormed out of the house, shouting, "Come on, we don't need mom anymore." The marriage lasted only 4 months. After the divorce, Vanessa decided to publicly share her experience. In an interview, she recounted a troubling episode when she asked Raven's parents about Janet's death. When directly questioned if he had killed his first wife, Raven evasively replied, "I loved my wife." Meanwhile, Janet's case remained unsolved. The Christensen family continued their fight for justice, but the investigation had reached a standstill. The only active party in the pursuit of truth remained the family of the deceased. In an effort to clear his name, Raven gave an interview to the program North Carolina Wanted. He denied any involvement in the murder of Janet and asserted his desire for a more thorough investigation. However, his demeanor during the interview raised further suspicions he spoke more about himself than about his deceased wife. During this period, detectives uncovered another troubling fact. Prior to the murder, Raven had kept their dogs caged inside the house. Yet, on the night of the tragedy, he abruptly altered this routine, locking them in the shed. Investigators speculated that this was a deliberate act to prevent the dogs from defending Janet or alerting the neighbors with their barking. In 2009, the case was handed over to a new detective, Charles Soule. He began to examine the investigation materials with a fresh perspective and noticed a detail that had previously been overlooked: a contact lens case on Janet's vanity. The family confirmed that Janet never went to bed wearing contact lenses. It was a steadfast ritual she adhered to rigorously. However, Raven claimed that when he left for a football game, his wife was already preparing for sleep. This discrepancy prompted Detective Soule to dig deeper. He made the bold decision to petition for the exhumation of Janet's body. The family supported this decision, and in July 2010, the procedure was carried out. During the examination, fragments of contact lenses were discovered in Janet's eyes, preserved even after 5 years of burial. To validate the reliability of this evidence, ophthalmologist Charles Curling conducted a unique experiment. He learned the embalming technique from a North Carolina funeral home and performed studies with 2 sets of pig eyes that had contact lenses. The eyes were embalmed, wrapped in burial cloths, and buried 6 feet underground. The first set was retrieved after 6 months, and the second after a year. In both instances, the lenses were found to be preserved, albeit wrinkled and discolored exactly like the lenses found in Janet's eyes. This scientifically confirmed that she was not preparing for sleep at the time of her murder. Detective Soule also discovered that Raven had stopped at a store on his way home the night of the murder. Surveillance footage showed him dressed differently than when the police arrived at his home, indicating he had time to change clothes. On February 1, 2010, Raven Abaroa was arrested on charges of first-degree murder. The trial commenced in 2013, drawing significant public and media attention. The courtroom was filled with relatives, friends, and onlookers. The prosecution built its case on a series of circumstantial evidence and testimonies regarding Raven's character. A number of women took the stand, recounting his violent behavior and manipulative tendencies. Vanessa Pond detailed her experience of psychological and physical abuse during their brief marriage. One of the key witnesses was Annabelle Haviza, a former lover of Raven. She spoke of his methodical nature in concealing infidelities and recounted an incident where she deliberately left strands of her hair in his car, fearing for her life. The defense emphasized the absence of direct evidence linking Raven to the murder. They pointed out that the shoe and fingerprint impressions found at the crime scene did not belong to the defendant. There was also an attempt to portray Janet as a woman who might have had romantic entanglements with other men. After 5 weeks of trial, the jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict. 11 of the 12 jurors voted to convict Raven, but 1 insisted on his innocence. The trial ended in a mistrial. Before the commencement of the second trial in 2014, Raven unexpectedly agreed to a plea deal with the prosecution. He accepted an Alford plea, a particular form of guilty plea in which the defendant does not admit to the crime but acknowledges that the prosecution has sufficient evidence for a conviction. He was sentenced to a term of 95 to 123 months in prison, taking into account the 4 years he had already spent incarcerated during the investigation. On Christmas 2017, at the age of 39, Raven was released. Raven Abaroa's sentence evoked mixed feelings among all those involved in the case. Janet's family deemed the punishment too lenient, considering it involved the brutal murder of a young mother and her unborn child. Vanessa Pond publicly expressed her opinion: "This is not justice. This is not justice at all." Today, Raven lives in Utah as a free man. He has never fully acknowledged his culpability in Janet's death. Through the Alford plea, he managed to maintain a formal stance of innocence, even while conceding that sufficient evidence existed for a conviction. The case of Janet Abaroa transformed the approach to investigating domestic violence in North Carolina. Investigators began to pay closer attention to seemingly minor details that may have previously appeared insignificant, such as the contact lenses in the victim's eyes. There was also an increased focus on the psychological aspects of domestic violence and the importance of documenting changes in the behavior of potential abusers. The story of this crime illuminated several critical issues within the justice system. Firstly, the difficulty of proving guilt in the absence of direct evidence, even with numerous circumstantial testimonies. Secondly, the shortcomings of plea bargain systems, which sometimes allow individuals to evade full accountability for serious crimes. Caden, the son of Janet and Raven, grew up without knowing his mother. The Christensen family continues to honor Janet's memory by sharing stories of her kindness, devotion to faith, and boundless love for her son. They established a foundation in her name to assist victims of domestic violence. This case serves as a cautionary tale about how a charismatic exterior can conceal a dangerous personality, and it is a reminder of the importance of being vigilant regarding early signs of violent behavior in relationships. The case of Janet Abaroa stands as a poignant example of how the justice system grapples with instances of domestic violence, particularly when they culminate in tragedy. Since her murder, significant changes have occurred in the methods of investigating such crimes. The key lessons from this case can be categorized into several areas. The first is the importance of early identification of signs of violent behavior. Raven exhibited alarming signals long before the murder: control, manipulation, infidelity, and sudden mood swings. However, religious beliefs and social pressures often compel victims to remain in perilous relationships. The second lesson pertains to investigative methods. Detective Soul demonstrated the significance of re-examining old evidence with a fresh perspective. His attention to detail regarding the contact lenses and his initiative to conduct a scientific experiment set a new standard for forensic investigations. The third aspect highlights the flaws within the criminal justice system. The Alford plea, while facilitating the avoidance of lengthy trials, can create situations where justice appears incomplete. In Raven's case, it allowed him to receive a relatively lenient sentence while maintaining a formal denial of guilt. Statistics indicate that Janet's case is not unique. Many women lose their lives at the hands of their partners, particularly during pregnancy. This case helped draw attention to the necessity for better protection for victims of domestic violence and the importance of listening to those who report violence in relationships. Today, Janet's story is utilized in training law enforcement as an example of the critical importance of paying attention to the smallest details during investigations and not dismissing any theories, even when the suspect has a seemingly solid alibi. On December 1, 2011, in the town of Deer Park, Washington, the day began like any ordinary winter morning. The small community, with a population of approximately 3,000 residents, was awakening to its daily routines. At 6:00 a.m., the familiar morning bustle commenced in the home located at 509 North Riper Street as the Starbuck family stirred from slumber. 42-year-old Shannon Starbuck was preparing for her workday. Having graduated with honors from dental hygiene courses in the summer of 2011, she had recently secured a position at a local dental clinic. Her ex-husband, Clay, was supposed to take the children to school, as he typically did, living nearby. At 6:29, Shannon sent a tweet to one of her friends. It seemed that nothing foreshadowed impending doom. However, shortly thereafter, a message arrived from Clay. His car had broken down, and he requested Shannon to take the children to school herself. "Car quit. Can you take the kids?" he wrote. Shannon acquiesced with a brief K. After the children, 15-year-old Logan, her younger sister Serena, and 10-year-old Marshall departed for school, Shannon returned home. At 7:11, she sent a message to a friend, arranging to meet before classes. This would be the last verifiably confirmed communication Shannon had with the outside world. At 9:18 a.m., a call was made to 911 from Shannon's phone. The dispatcher, who had been on the line for 17 years, heard only a brief high-pitched sound resembling a scream, followed by static, after which the connection was severed. When the operator attempted to call back, the phone was already turned off. GPS data indicated that the call originated from Shannon's residence. However, contrary to protocol, which mandated a callback and potential dispatch of a patrol, the dispatcher did not assign the appropriate significance to this call. Throughout the day, various messages were sent from Shannon's phone, but as the investigation would later reveal, they were no longer authored by her. At 2:45 p.m., her daughter Logan texted her mother, inquiring who would pick them up from school. 20 minutes later, a response arrived stating that their father would come, as Shannon had a headache. At 3:06 p.m., another message was sent from Shannon's phone, utilizing Marshall's home nickname Marsh, which would later prove to be a crucial detail for the investigation. "Send Marsh a note. Dad will be there in 10 minutes, the message stated. However, Clay never arrived to collect the children. His phone was off, and he had not received any of these messages. Concerned, Logan texted her mother twice but received no reply. Ultimately, she reached out to her 21-year-old brother Austin, who worked at a local glass company. He picked up his younger siblings and took them to their father, as none of the children possessed a spare key to their mother's home. Clay was taken aback by the sudden arrival of the children but was not overly concerned about the lack of communication with his ex-wife. He anticipated seeing her that evening at their son Blake's basketball game at Deer Park High School. At 5:45 p.m., he sent Shannon a message: "If you feel better, call me and I'll meet you at the booth so you don't have to pay." When Shannon failed to appear at the game, Clay and the children went to her house. The doors were locked, the lights were off, and no one answered their calls. They circled the house, shining flashlights through the windows, but it appeared that no one was home. Finding nothing suspicious, they returned to their residence. Since the younger children lived with their mother, they lacked essential belongings and school supplies, causing them to miss classes the following day, December 2nd. Clay warned that if there was no word from Shannon by 7:00 p.m., he would contact the police. Deer Park, where these tragic events unfolded, was a quintessential American small town. Nestled in Washington state, it attracted residents with its serene atmosphere and sense of security. It was these very qualities that had drawn Shannon Starbuck to the town in May 2008, during her first visit. The Starbuck family's relocation to Deer Park occurred after their second marriage. Shannon immediately fell in love with the place, deeming it ideal for raising children. Here, everyone knew their neighbor, and violent crimes were a rarity. The family settled into a 4-bedroom house with 3 bathrooms on North Riper Street. Life in Deer Park had its own unique rhythm. Clay continued to work on the pipeline in Alaska, which meant prolonged absences. Shannon immersed herself in community life, actively participating in church events and her children's school activities. She quickly earned the respect of local residents through her kindness and professionalism. Yet beneath the facade of idyllic small-town life lay darker undercurrents. The location of Shannon's ground-floor home, with windows facing the parking lot, would later prove to be a fatal factor. This arrangement allowed for observation of the residents and easy access to the premises. Following their second divorce in June 2010, Clay moved into a house approximately a mile from his ex-wife. This proximity was intended to facilitate co-parenting, but instead created conditions for constant surveillance of Shannon's life. Shannon Conway was born on April 19, 1969, in Anderson, Indiana. She was the youngest of 3 children in a deeply religious family. Her childhood was altered following her parents' divorce. Her mother moved with the children to Florida, where in 1975 she married Charles Borsch, who had 6 children of his own. Another girl was born from this marriage. From an early age, Shannon exhibited creative talents. She loved to draw and sew, possessing a knack for crafts. Her creations were of such quality that she later sold her handmade quilts at local fairs for $1,000. Kind-hearted and sociable, she often assisted neighbors by caring for their children. After graduating from Lake Mary High School in 1987, Shannon enrolled at Florida State University in Tallahassee, later transferring to a local college where she won a scholarship. She earned an associate degree in art therapy. The young woman did not seek the spotlight but stood out with her vibrant creative vision. In 1989, at the age of 20, fate brought her together with 24-year-old Clay Starbuck at a church dance. Clay, who had grown up in Oregon and later moved to Alaska, had a 5-year marriage behind him and 2 children. He had completed a diesel and automotive school in Denver and worked on the pipeline. A mutual attraction blossomed between the young couple, and on June 1, 1990, they wed in Florida. For Shannon, it was her first marriage. For Clay, it was his second. The young woman enthusiastically embraced her role as a stepmother to his children from his first marriage, a son and a daughter. After their wedding, the couple relocated to Valdez, Alaska, where Clay continued to work on the pipeline as a manager. The job required him to be away for extended periods. He could be absent for weeks, returning home only during vacations. For Shannon, this became a significant challenge: a new place, a harsh climate, and loneliness. At 21, Shannon gave birth to their first son, Austin. A few years later, their second son, Blake, was born. In 1996, their first daughter, Logan, arrived, later diagnosed with autism. Shannon accepted this news with calmness, prepared to provide her child with all the necessary care. The family would later welcome another daughter, Serena. Despite outward appearances of prosperity, their marriage proved less than idyllic. During one of his work rotations, Clay cheated on Shannon with a colleague. Furthermore, he never became a devoted church member, as Shannon had hoped. Clay claimed that his wife had also been unfaithful, though she denied these accusations. In March 2000, the couple divorced. 30-year-old Shannon moved with her children to Arizona, where she began dating another man. However, her feelings for Clay did not fade. A few months later, she reached out to her ex-husband, suggesting they give their relationship another chance. They reconciled and returned to Alaska. In 2001, the couple welcomed another son, Marshall. However, his birth brought new complications. Clay doubted his paternity, believing the child might have been conceived during Shannon's time in Arizona. Despite his suspicions, he accepted the boy as his own. On December 29, 2006, Clay and Shannon decided to formalize their relationship once more by marrying for a second time. For a year and a half, their life seemed to stabilize, but May 2008 brought changes. The family moved to Deer Park. Clay continued to work in Alaska, while Shannon focused on the children and church activities. Beneath the surface of ordinary family life, troubling signs began to emerge. Between June and November 2011, Shannon contacted the police 4 times to report stalking. She noticed that someone had been entering her home in her absence. Light bulbs were unscrewed in the garage, and the barbecue was overturned on the porch. Once, she discovered that someone had damaged the truck lent to her by her friend Summer. Shannon began to affix tape to the doors to ascertain whether anyone had entered in her absence. Jewelry and even a firearm went missing. Consequently, she installed a surveillance camera in the kitchen. The financial situation was also deteriorating. After suffering a back injury in February 2011, Clay lost his job and was receiving disability assistance. He was unable to pay the $5,000 in child support, which exceeded his benefits. Shannon was on the verge of eviction, her electricity was disconnected, and her car was repossessed. In October 2011, a judge ordered Clay to pay Shannon over $9,000 in overdue child support and court costs. At the same hearing, Shannon was granted entitlement to 50% of Clay's pension. This ruling marked a turning point in their relationship. In the summer of 2011, Shannon graduated with honors from dental hygiene courses and secured employment. At the age of 42, she finally felt a sense of financial independence and resolved to seek personal happiness. She created a profile on a dating site, which provoked a furious reaction from Clay. Clay began to closely monitor his ex-wife's personal life. He installed keylogging software on her laptop, allowing him to track all her online activities. He showed their children purportedly nude photographs of their mother, which she had sent to men, turning them against her. In Shannon's journal, an entry from September 2011 read Marshall was upset after spending the day with his father. He said that his father showed him several pictures from my phone. One was allegedly a nude photo of me, with his father covering my breasts with his finger. His father told him that I had sent these photos to men. Clay spoke to acquaintances and neighbors about Shannon's personal life, often exaggerating and distorting the facts. He claimed that she had cheated on him during their marriage, was a poor mother, and was a promiscuous woman. He was particularly troubled by her dating other men. In the months leading up to Shannon's death, she repeatedly told family and friends that if anything were to happen to her, they should check on Clay. She feared he might harm her to avoid paying child support. However, her concerns were not taken seriously. On the morning of December 1, 2011, a sequence of events unfolded that led to tragedy. At 8:08 a.m., Clay sent Shannon a message about a broken car and immediately turned off his phone, a fact that later drew the attention of investigators, as he had never turned off his phone for such an extended period in the past year. At 9:18 a.m., a critical moment occurred, a call to 911 from Shannon's phone. The dispatcher heard only a brief scream and rustling. When attempting to call back, the phone was found to be turned off. The GPS coordinates indicated Shannon's home, but a protocol violation by the dispatcher resulted in no patrol being dispatched. From 12:05 to 1600, Shannon's phone sent 11 messages and received 99. All these messages, as later established by the investigation, were sent by the murderer, mimicking her communication style. Notably, the use of the family nickname Marsh for the younger son indicated the perpetrator's close familiarity with the family. At 15:17, Shannon's phone sent a final message to Clay, requesting him to pick up the children from school due to a headache. Clay accidentally turned on his phone only at 15:37, by which time the children were already with Austin. At 21:06, he sent Shannon a reproachful message about her missing their son's basketball game. Throughout the day, Clay claimed he was repairing his car, which had supposedly broken down near the golf course. He stated that he walked the same route from the house to the car several times. However, the investigation later revealed that there were surveillance cameras along that route, and none had captured Clay at the specified time. On December 2, 2011, after more than a day without news from Shannon, her mother Melanie, who lived in Florida, began to panic. Shannon's voicemail was full, and no relatives could reach her. At 5:00 p.m., Melanie called emergency services to request a welfare check on her daughter's home. Around 6:15 p.m., 2 police officers arrived at Shannon's address. An uncollected package, delivered that day, lay on the doorstep. The officers circled the house, shone lights into the windows, but saw nothing suspicious and left after 10 minutes. At 7:00 p.m., Clay also contacted the police, echoing Melanie's report. The following morning, December 3rd, at 9:11 a.m., the police, along with the homeowner, finally entered the house. In the bedroom, they discovered Shannon's body. She lay on the bed nearly fully undressed, in a disheveled robe, her hands bound. The body bore numerous signs of torture and abuse. The coroner uncovered horrifying details. The victim had 10 broken ribs, a crushed larynx, and numerous bruises and marks from a stun gun. The body had approximately 90 injuries. The cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation, which lasted about 2 hours until the lungs filled with fluid. The perpetrator attempted to stage a sexual assault by placing a bottle of lubricant on the nightstand and leaving a vibrator inside the victim. An open safe in the room contained numerous sex toys, a detail that struck investigators as odd, given Shannon's modest and religious nature. After the body was discovered, Clay arrived at Shannon's home and, upon learning of her death, began to actively assist the investigation. He immediately proposed a theory that the murderer could be one of the men Shannon had met through dating sites. He provided detectives with information about all the sites his ex-wife had used. During his first interrogation, Clay constantly cried and shouted at the police, insisting that they should search among Shannon's new acquaintances. He spoke of nude photographs found on her computer, which she allegedly sent to men. It later emerged that Clay had installed spyware on her computer to monitor all her activities. Investigators noted Clay's peculiar behavior following Shannon's death. He would separately pull her friends aside to tell them about her supposed promiscuous lifestyle. For instance, he invited Shannon's friend Doug into a separate room to discuss her sexual deviations. This occurred on the very day her body was found. The investigation revealed that Clay systematically attempted to tarnish Shannon's reputation. As early as April, he complained to their dentist and church member about her online dating. To the same dentist, Shannon later confessed that she feared Clay and believed he might harm her to avoid paying child support. Clay's alibi began to crumble under scrutiny. The cameras along the route he claimed to have taken to the broken car did not capture his presence. His explanation for the turned-off phone contradicted his usual behavior patterns. This was the only instance in a year where he had turned off his phone for an extended period. Key evidence in the case emerged from DNA testing results. Samples of DNA belonging to Clay Starbuck's paternal lineage were found on Shannon's neck and under her nails. Experts employed YSTR testing, which detects DNA through the Y chromosome passed down through the male line. Particular attention was drawn to 3 areas on the victim's body: her neck, face, and right hand, where DNA traces were found. Since neither Clay nor his older sons lived with Shannon, their DNA should not have been present on her body. The only male living in the house, the younger son Marshall, had different DNA, which confirmed Clay's suspicions that he was not the biological father of the boy. Investigators also discovered sperm on the victim's body. DNA analysis indicated that it belonged to someone from the Starbuck family. Since the alibis of the older sons, Austin, who was at work, and Blake, who was at school, were corroborated, Clay remained the sole suspect. The examination revealed that death resulted from asphyxiation with a soft object, possibly a towel or hands. The victim did not die immediately. The agony lasted about 2 hours. The body bore characteristic marks from a stun gun, indicating torture prior to death. An important piece of evidence also emerged from the fitness app data on Shannon's phone. It indicated that the phone ceased to register movement at 8:04 a.m., yet recorded an additional 14 steps 15 minutes later. This coincided with the time of the 911 call and suggested the moment of the attack. Simultaneously, Clay's phone registered heightened physical activity and an accelerated heart rate in the period leading up to the murder. The investigation painted a detailed picture of the crime. Clay had premeditated the murder, as evidenced by his internet search history. He sought information on how to dispose of a wife, Hindu funeral rites, and the procedure for claiming life insurance benefits in the event of a spouse's death. On the morning of December 1st, he sent a message about a broken car to compel Shannon to take the children to school. While she was away, Clay infiltrated the home and awaited her return. Upon Shannon's arrival, he attacked her. During the struggle, she managed to call 911 but was unable to cry out for help. After the murder, Clay staged a scene of sexual violence in an attempt to divert suspicion from himself. He positioned the body in a manner that corresponded with a request from one of Shannon's online acquaintances for a provocative photo. This was intended to direct suspicion towards the men with whom she had been communicating on dating sites. Throughout the day, Clay utilized Shannon's phone, sending messages to various individuals while mimicking her communication style. He sought to create the illusion that she was alive and merely unwell. Particularly telling was the use of familial nicknames in the messages, indicating an intimate familiarity with her family. The motive for the murder stemmed from a toxic blend of jealousy, obsession, and financial woes. Clay could not accept that Shannon had embarked on a new life following their divorce. Furthermore, he was obligated to pay her substantial alimony and a portion of his pension, which added to his stress. The situation of Shannon and Clay's children was especially tragic. Their older sons, Austin and Blake, who lived with their father post-divorce, adamantly refused to believe in his guilt. They actively supported Clay during the investigation and trial, asserting that the police were attempting to frame an innocent man. During court proceedings, the children testified in favor of their father. They claimed that Clay's car frequently broke down and that he often napped during the day due to back pain. Marshall even testified that he saw his father at 4 p.m. on the day of the murder with oily hands after working on the car. Austin and Blake openly mocked the prosecution's evidence, deeming it absurd. Clay's influence over the children manifested even before Shannon's death. He systematically turned them against their mother, showing them purportedly explicit photographs of her and discussing her personal life. Consequently, the children began to alienate themselves from her. In her diary, Shannon wrote about how, after weekends with their father, the children returned home angry with her. Following Clay's arrest on February 6, 2012, he was prohibited from any contact with the younger children until they reached adulthood. This decision was made at the request of the prosecution. Logan, Serena, and Marshall found themselves in a precarious situation. They had lost not only their mother but also their father. The children's financial situation also deteriorated. Since Shannon was not employed at the time of her death and Clay was dismissed following his arrest, the children were unable to receive assistance due to the loss of their breadwinner. Family friends organized a fundraiser to establish a trust fund to support the children. The trial of 48-year-old Clay Starbuck commenced in May 2013. The prosecution presented over 70 witnesses. The primary theory of the prosecution was that, in the months leading up to the murder, Clay deliberately crafted an image of Shannon as a woman whose lifestyle posed a threat. Prosecutors demonstrated that Clay employed spyware to monitor Shannon's communications, was aware of her schedule and plans. He utilized this information to create an alibi for himself and to obfuscate the investigation. He initially lured her out of the house, infiltrated it, awaited her return, and, in a fit of jealousy, subjected her to torture and murder. The defense attempted to refute the DNA evidence, arguing that the genetic material could have transferred to Shannon's body since Clay had lived in the house several months prior to the tragedy. The attorneys also pointed to the presence of an unidentified DNA sample under the victim's nails, suggesting the existence of another perpetrator. Approximately 20 witnesses, including the children, testified on behalf of the defense. They insisted on Clay's innocence, claiming that due to his back issues, he was physically incapable of committing such a crime. However, none of their testimonies could account for the presence of Clay's DNA on the victim's body. In June 2013, the jury found Clay guilty of first-degree murder with 4 aggravating circumstances. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. An appeal filed in 2015 was denied. Clay is currently serving his sentence at the Airway Heights Correctional Center in Washington State. The case of Shannon Starbuck left a profound mark on the history of Deer Park and continues to impact the lives of many. The most tragic turn of events was the fate of the Starbuck children. Logan, the 25-year-old third child of Shannon, who suffered from autism, disappeared on December 18, 2021, after boarding a bus in Washington State. On February 10, 2022, her body was discovered in a river. She had taken her own life. The rift within the family persists to this day. Heated debates rage on social media between Shannon's family and Clay's supporters. There exists a support group advocating for his release, where photographs of the Starbuck children visiting their father in prison are regularly shared. Clay himself occasionally posts his thoughts there, continuing to tarnish Shannon's memory. Shannon's mother, Melanie, who attended every day of the trial, deliberately positioned herself so that Clay would be compelled to look her in the eye as he was brought into the courtroom. She expressed relief following the verdict, stating, if she wanted to date, she could have. At least she had a life. She never had a life with him. This case transformed the operations of the 911 service in the region. Although the dispatcher was not dismissed for protocol violations during Shannon's call, her case is now used as a teaching example. The Communications Center conducted additional training on handling unanswered calls. The story of Shannon Starbuck serves as a cautionary tale about how domestic violence can masquerade as care and control, how manipulation can fracture the bonds between a mother and her children, and how the justice system sometimes reacts too late to alarming signals. On the border between Oklahoma and Texas lies the small town of Waurika, with a population of about 2,000 residents. It's a typical American provincial town where everyone knows each other and life flows at a measured, unhurried pace. It was here, in a cozy house on the outskirts of town, that the rich family lived: Father Dwayne, Mother Gail, and their 4 children, 3 boys and their only daughter, Heather. The rich couple chose Waurika as their home because of its similarity to Elgin, Oklahoma, where they grew up. They believed it was the perfect place to raise children, quiet, safe, with a low crime rate. However, as often happens, the outward tranquility of the small town concealed its dark sides. In Waurika, like in many similar towns, teenagers suffered from a lack of entertainment and opportunities for self-realization. This led young people to seek alternative ways to spend their leisure time, often dangerous and destructive. They would gather on the outskirts of town, experiment with alcohol and drugs, and engage in risky activities. This was the atmosphere in the town during the fall of 1996 when this tragic story began, one that would forever change the lives of many local residents and leave a deep mark in the memory of the entire community. At that time, the rich family was going through a difficult period. Dwayne, who worked as an electrician, had recently suffered a serious injury at work. During a transformer explosion, he sustained severe burns. The man barely survived and needed extensive treatment and skin grafts. Due to his injury, he couldn't work, which significantly impacted the family's financial situation. The entire burden of supporting the family fell on Gail's shoulders, who had to take on additional work to provide for the family and pay for her husband's expensive treatment. In the American healthcare system, medical services are extraordinarily expensive, so every dollar counted. The children also had to take on some household responsibilities, especially Heather, who was the second youngest in the family. Despite their financial difficulties, the Riches tried to maintain optimism and support each other. Gail and Dwayne were loving parents who strived to give their children the best upbringing and education possible. They adhered to traditional family values and tried to instill these in their children. However, as often happens during teenage years, their only daughter began showing signs of rebellion and a desire for independence. The parents paid special attention to Heather, who was born on January 19, 1980. She was the family's favorite, the only girl among brothers. From early childhood, Heather demonstrated remarkable abilities and persistence in her studies, making her parents proud. At Waurika High School, Heather Rich quickly became one of the most popular students. She combined a rare mix of beauty, intelligence, and athletic ability. As an honor student, she consistently demonstrated high academic performance. She was chosen for the cheerleading squad, which added to her popularity among classmates. In her junior year of high school, Heather was nominated for Homecoming Queen and was voted class favorite. Her natural beauty and energy attracted the attention of many boys. However, behind this external glamour lay serious internal problems. The constant pressure to maintain the image of the perfect girl began to affect Heather's mental state. By 8th grade, she had developed eating disorders. She would induce vomiting in an attempt to maintain a size 2. The situation worsened after her father's injury when additional responsibility for household chores fell on her shoulders. Heather began self-harming, though she carefully concealed this from those around her. She diligently maintained the image of a successful and happy girl, but internally felt increasing pressure. Her perfectionism and desire to meet others' expectations gradually became an unbearable burden. Despite her internal struggles, Heather remained a friendly and caring girl. She had an adventurous spirit and loved fun and new experiences. At 16, she was going through a typical teenage period of rebellion, eager to try everything life had to offer. Unfortunately, this desire for experimentation would later play a fatal role in her destiny. In the summer of 1996, Heather began dating Randy Wood, who was born on July 7, 1979. Their relationship was quite illustrative of the contrasts in their small town. Randy came from one of Warwick's poorest families. He lived with his single mother, they moved frequently, and by 5th grade, he had changed schools 3 times. Their house stood out with its run-down appearance and broken windows. Every day, Randy walked a mile to school. Despite his difficult life, Randy had a calm and polite demeanor. Although many considered him slow and not particularly bright, he was appointed captain of the school football team. Paradoxically, it was these flaws of Randy's that attracted Heather. They spent a lot of time together, driving around town in Randy's grandmother's car, attending church, and talking for hours. While their relationship was close, they maintained certain boundaries. However, at the beginning of the school year, their relationship ended due to rumors. Randy heard that Heather had been skinny dipping at a party and ended their 5-month relationship. After this breakup, Heather's behavior began to change dramatically. She started experimenting with methamphetamine, alcohol, and other drugs. The situation worsened when less than a week after breaking up with Randy, one of Heather's friends, 20-year-old Dennis, died by suicide. This event deeply affected the girl, and she continued her self-destructive behavior. On September 27, 1996, an incident occurred that would foreshadow the future tragedy. Heather was caught drinking alcohol with a friend during a football game. For this, she was suspended from school for 3 days and nearly kicked off the cheerleading squad. Gail and Dwayne, concerned about their daughter's behavior, even scheduled a therapy appointment for October 3rd. Unfortunately, this meeting would never take place. On the evening of October 2, 1996, a serious argument erupted in the rich household between Heather and her mother Gail. The cause was a $300 phone bill that Heather had run up talking to her friends, especially Randy Wood. Given the family's difficult financial situation, such an amount was extremely high. Gail tried to explain to her daughter that the family couldn't afford such expenses, especially considering the high cost of her father's treatment. She wanted to teach Heather to value money and respect others' work. "All you do is waste my money," Gail exclaimed during the argument. Dwayne, though usually calmer in family conflicts, supported his wife this time. Heather took the criticism hard. When emotions had somewhat subsided, she went downstairs to the living room, said goodnight to her father, but demonstratively ignored her mother, showing her resentment. On this tense note, everyone went to their rooms. However, this wasn't just another teenage argument. That evening, Heather had secret plans. She had arranged to meet with Josh Bagwell, whom she had recently started flirting with after breaking up with Randy. Josh was a senior from one of the wealthiest families in town. He lived with his grandmother and grandfather, who spoiled him by giving him everything he wanted. Around midnight, after waiting for her parents to fall asleep, Heather climbed out through her bedroom window. She didn't take any change of clothes or makeup, items she usually never left home without. This would be her last night at home, though she didn't know it yet. Outside, she was met by not only Josh. With him were Randy Wood and 19-year-old Curtis Gamble, a young man with a criminal past whom Heather hadn't known before. They planned to spend the evening in a trailer behind Josh's house, where teenagers regularly gathered to drink alcohol and use drugs. The next morning, October 3rd, Gail began preparing breakfast as usual and calling the children to the table. When Heather didn't come down, her mother initially attributed this to teenage resentment over yesterday's argument. She was sure that Humber would eventually bring her daughter to the kitchen, despite her rebellious mood. However, time passed, and Heather still hadn't appeared. When Gail, losing patience, went up to her daughter's room, she found an empty bed. At that time, mobile phones weren't yet common, so Heather didn't have one. The worried parents began calling all of their daughter's friends, but no one knew where she might be. Such behavior was completely out of character for Heather. Despite her recent behavioral problems, she had never run away from home before. Moreover, the girl always cared about her appearance and was unlikely to go anywhere for long without a change of clothes and makeup. But all her things remained at home. Gail and Dwayne immediately drove to the Warka Sheriff's Office to report their daughter missing. The mother told them about yesterday's argument over the phone bill and how her daughter had refused to acknowledge her fault. The sheriff tried to calm the worried parents, assuring them that the girl had probably just run away from home, as teenagers often do after arguing with their parents. However, law enforcement explained that for an official missing person report, at least 24 hours had to pass without any contact. Since this time hadn't elapsed yet, the police couldn't accept the report and sent the couple home to wait for news from Heather. Disappointed by the police's response, Gail and Dwayne decided to start their own search in town. Their worst fears were being confirmed. Something had happened to their daughter, and they felt that every lost minute could be critical. Gail began her own investigation by calling Heather's closest friends. First, she contacted 17-year-old Randy Wood. During the conversation, Heather's ex-boyfriend insisted he had no idea about her whereabouts. However, something in his voice alarmed Gail. He spoke like a robot, repeating a rehearsed story, and showed no concern about his former girlfriend's disappearance. Next was a call to Josh Bagwell. His grandmother answered the phone, saying that the boy was resting after last night's party, and she didn't want to disturb him. The woman categorically refused to call her grandson to the phone, mentioning in passing that she was cleaning the trailer in the backyard where the teenagers had held their party. For a week, the parents drove around the entire county searching for any trace of their daughter, but to no avail. When 24 hours had passed, they went back to the police, and this time law enforcement finally joined the search operation. However, no valuable information about the missing schoolgirl emerged. The tragic resolution came when patrol officers examining the area near the Texas border noticed a body in the river. It was half submerged in the muddy water, but people on the bridge spotted it. The unknown victim's skin was covered with a thick layer of dirt, as if deliberately, to make the body harder to discover. When divers pulled the gruesome find to shore, something even more horrific was revealed beneath the layer of dirt. The body had numerous buckshot wounds, indicating point-blank shooting, likely from a shotgun. The face was so mutilated that identifying the deceased at first glance seemed impossible. Since there was only one missing person registered in the area, Heather Rich's parents were called for identification. They were only able to identify their daughter by an engraved ring that her mother had given her. The victim's identity was finally confirmed through dental records. Experts found the fixed braces that the schoolgirl had been wearing in the mutilated body. News of the young cheerleader's death instantly spread through town and became the main topic of discussion the next day. Within hours, all local residents knew about the tragedy. Football player Randy Wood also learned about it, coinciding with the annual game where he had been named king of the game for several seasons in a row. Usually, such matches were followed by loud celebrations, but this time there was no mood for festivities. The detectives, taking on the investigation, first spoke with Heather's parents. By that time, Gail had already called many of her daughter's friends and acquaintances. Her suspicions fell on two young men, Heather's ex-boyfriend, 17-year-old Randy Wood, and her current boyfriend Josh Bagwell. During conversations with classmates and other friends of the deceased, investigators got several leads indicating that Josh and Randy had information about the events of that fatal night. Particular attention was drawn to the type of ammunition used in the killing, so-called double buckshot. These powerful shells had excessive killing power for executing a 16-year-old girl. An important breakthrough came when it was discovered that such rare ammunition was sold in only one store in town, Beaver Creek Lumber and Hardware. After checking receipts, police established that Josh Bagwell had purchased them shortly before the murder. According to the seller, Josh wasn't with his best friend Randy, but with someone named Curtis Gamble. Curtis, who was already 19 years old, had a criminal history. Despite his young age, he had already been arrested multiple times and spent most of his conscious life in juvenile detention centers. The young man was completely unstable and had repeatedly caught law enforcement's attention. He had been caught driving drunk, shooting at dogs, horses, and even random passers-by. On October 23, police visited Curtis's house in a neighboring town. Even more significant was the fact that just a few kilometers from his house was the very bridge where the mutilated body was found. According to his grandmother, Curtis knew this area well and had often visited the bridge since childhood. The investigation focused on 3 young men, each representing different social strata of the small town. Josh Bagwell was a typical representative of the golden youth. He always drove the coolest cars and wore the most fashionable clothes, displaying his family's wealth. By 17, he had already crashed 6 cars, and his latest was a white Dodge Stealth. When he was once detained for drunk driving, he arrogantly demanded a lawyer. Randy Wood, on the contrary, came from a poor family, but thanks to his talent and persistence in sports, he gained no less popularity than his wealthy friend. Classmates adored the handsome team captain for his masterful play on the field. He became the best football player not only in school but in the entire town, even gaining popularity among school teams at the state level. Curtis Gamble turned out to be the oldest among those involved in the case. He was already 19. He had a long history of legal troubles and was considered dangerous and unpredictable by local residents. Unlike the other 2 boys, who had never had problems with the law before and weren't considered aggressive or dangerous, Randy and Josh were inseparable friends and usually spent weekends driving around dirt roads in Josh's car. Girls could often be seen in their company. The boys regularly consumed alcohol and occasionally smoked marijuana. Due to the lack of entertainment venues for youth in town, teenagers simply had nothing else to do, so they entertained themselves however they could. It was known that Heather Rich often spent time in this company. According to a friend, she had also tried weed and alcohol with them, and on the night before her disappearance, she had snuck out to have fun with the popular boys. This news shocked the parents of the 16-year-old honor student, who had no idea their daughter had fallen in with such dangerous company. Detectives decided to talk to Josh and Randy, who were the last to see the murdered schoolgirl. Both boys told the same story about spending the evening playing dominoes and drinking in the trailer behind Josh's house. However, they denied any contact with Heather that evening. Their mechanical, seemingly rehearsed stories and lack of emotion regarding their mutual friend's death only intensified investigator suspicions. The next day, detectives managed to meet with Curtis. He was detained and brought to the sheriff's office in Waurika. The interrogation lasted over 8 hours, but the suspect said almost nothing, though he agreed to take a polygraph test. However, what proved most valuable was his admission about owning a rather rare weapon, a Mossberg shotgun, notable for its 9-round magazine. When the weapon was seized and ballistic testing ordered, experts officially confirmed that the schoolgirl had been shot with Curtis's shotgun. After being presented with evidence of his involvement in the young cheerleader's murder, the young man gave in. He told police that he had dragged his 2 friends, Randy and Josh, into this crime, after which he wrote a detailed 2-page confession. 3 weeks after Heather's death, law enforcement finally had a suspect who confessed to the crime. Considering the probable involvement of other young men, Randy and Josh were also arrested and brought to the station. They were shown Curtis's testimony, where he claimed that he himself initiated the attack on the girl, but Randy was the direct perpetrator. According to Curtis, he handed his shotgun to his friend and ordered him to shoot the innocent victim, while Josh was simply present. However, police were skeptical of this testimony. The football team captain didn't fit the profile of a typical criminal. The young man had never had problems with the law before. He was an exemplary student and successful athlete, popular among his peers. No one had ever spoken badly about him. Only after persistent efforts by police and a second meeting with investigators did Randy finally begin to give testimony. However, he categorically denied his direct involvement in the murder, claiming that Curtis was the shooter and had initiated the attack on Heather, while Josh simply helped him. Josh, for his part, refused to cooperate with law enforcement. Thus, in October 1996, investigators had two confessions that contradicted each other in many aspects. Eventually, investigators concluded that Randy's testimony seemed more truthful, especially since he successfully passed a lie detector test. In February 1998, almost a year and a half after Heather's tragic death, Josh Bagwell's trial began. The case had garnered so much attention that there were too many people wanting to get into the courtroom. Eventually, access to the court proceedings was restricted, with both casual spectators and press representatives being barred. The defendant's lawyers resorted to various attempts to justify their clients. In essence, the attorneys tried to tarnish Heather's reputation, portraying her as an alcoholic and promiscuous girl who had allegedly entered into an intimate relationship with Curtis and then began blackmailing him with exposure, forcing the young man to resort to extreme measures. The parents had to defend their daughter's honor and dignity. In reality, the girl was a diligent student, talented athlete, an extremely decent person who simply ended up in the wrong company and encountered a true criminal. At the hearing, unexpectedly for everyone, Curtis returned to his initial version of events, claiming that Josh wasn't involved in the crime at all and didn't even know about the murder plans. Instead, according to Curtis, it was Randy who fired the fatal shot. This testimony deeply affected Randy. Unexpectedly for all, the football team captain made a desperate move. He rejected the plea deal. The young man didn't want his confession to be seen as solely motivated by a desire to save his own skin. Accusing his accomplices right in the courtroom, Randy stated that above all, he wanted to achieve justice for the innocently murdered girl. On February 14th, Curtis Gamble was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and the intentional commission of this especially serious crime. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with an additional 99 years. Randy would receive life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Josh Bagwell also received life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He was sent to serve his sentence in the same correctional facility as Curtis. In January 2002, the story took an unexpected turn. Curtis and Josh made a bold prison escape attempt, taking advantage of the night darkness. They managed to hide out in Texas for 10 days. A nationwide manhunt was declared. Eventually, the escapees were caught and returned behind bars to continue serving their life sentences. An even stranger twist came when Josh's mother, Teresa, tried to help organize another escape. Her plan involved contacting Curtis's brother, Rick, and smuggling weapons into the prison by posing as Josh's attorney. She also wanted Rick to help her gather firearms, maps, and mobile phones for the escapees. However, when she contacted him, Curtis's brother reported it to the police. After a period of police surveillance, Teresa was arrested and sentenced to 20 years in prison, with 12 years suspended. The Heather Rich case deeply affected the Warka community and became a grim reminder of how quickly life can go wrong. Her death forced many parents to reconsider their approach to raising teenagers and pay more attention to their children's social circles. Special attention was drawn to the story of Heather's friend, Dennis Wayne Goss Jr., whose death from a shotgun blast on September 25, 1996, just a week before Heather's murder, still raises questions. Dennis was friends with Curtis Gamble, and before his death, he told his father that someone was trying to kill him. During their prison escape, Curtis and Josh even stole a .22 caliber pistol and a truck from Dennis's father's house. Curtis knew exactly where the safe keys were kept. Moreover, Dennis's family was on a threat list that Curtis wrote while in prison. The case of Dennis's death remains open to this day. On the railings of the Belknap Bridge, you can still see the inscription, "Dawn Not Forgotten." This graffiti became a kind of folk memorial to Heather, a girl who was popular among people and whose life ended too early due to a fatal combination of circumstances and the wrong choice of company. The Heather Rich case left a deep mark on the life of the small town of Waurika. It exposed problems that are often silenced in similar provincial towns: the lack of organized leisure activities for teenagers, easy access to alcohol and drugs, social inequality that breeds dangerous alliances between privileged youth and criminal elements. The fate of the 3 young men involved in the murder turned out differently, although they all ended up behind bars. Randy Wood, despite the severity of his sentence, remained in the community's memory as someone who found the courage to confess the truth, risking his own life. His remorse was genuine, and even Heather's parents acknowledged this during their personal meeting on a television talk show in May 1998. Curtis Gamble and Josh Bagwell, on the contrary, continued to demonstrate antisocial behavior even in prison. Their escape attempt and subsequent events only confirmed the danger they posed to society. Particularly telling was the story of Josh's mother, who, instead of acknowledging her son's guilt, tried to help him evade punishment through illegal means. The tragedy forced local authorities to revise their policies regarding youth recreation and teenage crime prevention. Controls over alcohol sales to minors were strengthened, and more opportunities for organized youth activities were created. The Heather Rich story became a warning for parents and teenagers about the importance of noticing warning signs early and not ignoring the first signs of risky behavior. Her death showed that even in the quietest towns, deadly dangers can lurk, especially when it comes to careless choice of company and experimentation with alcohol and drugs. Heather's memory lives on not only in the hearts of her family and friends but serves as a reminder of how quickly life can end due to one careless decision. The inscription on Belknap Bridge has become a symbol of this tragedy and a warning to future generations. The disappearance of 14-year-old Georgina Kruger in September 2006 shook the quiet Berlin district of Mobit. This case, which remained unsolved for over a decade, demonstrated how a carefully planned police investigation can expose even the most cautious criminal. Georgina lived with her mother, younger sister Michelle, and grandmother after her parents divorced several years ago. Her older brother Tommy, who was 22 at the time, lived separately. The girl was tall, slender, with a bright appearance. She loved wearing fashionable clothes, used makeup, and looked older than her age. She dreamed of a career as a model or actress, so she seriously engaged in dance, singing, and acting. At her new school, Georgina faced the standard problems after moving. Her appearance caused a real stir among the boys, which her female classmates strongly disliked. The girls kept their distance, openly envying the attention she received from the opposite sex. On September 22, 2006, an opportunity arose for Georgina to get closer to her dream. She successfully passed an audition for a small role in the TV series, Turkish for Beginners. The producers were supposed to call her on Monday, September 25, with the final decision regarding her participation in the filming. The girl spent the entire weekend in joyful anticipation. On Monday, Georgina was at school for classes as usual. After classes, around 2 p.m., she boarded bus number 27 to go home. She had to ride a few stops and then walk about a kilometer. According to eyewitnesses, the girl was last seen getting off the bus. At home, her grandmother and younger sister were waiting for her. They had prepared lunch and planned to spend the day together. When Georgina did not arrive on time, her grandmother tried to call her cell phone, but all calls were redirected to voicemail. The worried woman contacted the school, where they confirmed that the girl was in class and left after it ended. When Georgina's mother returned from work and learned about her daughter's disappearance, she immediately sensed something was wrong. Such behavior was completely uncharacteristic for the girl. She was always punctual and kept her commitments. It seemed especially suspicious that her phone was turned off on the very day she was expecting an important call from the studio. The police began the investigation by checking the most obvious versions. Could the girl have run away from home due to a conflict? But all her things remained in place. She had no money for an escape. Perhaps there was some fight with friends or classmates. However, questioning revealed no serious conflicts. With the help of footage from surveillance cameras, it was established that Georgina had indeed exited the bus at her stop. Unfortunately, tracking her further route was impossible due to the lack of cameras on the way to her house. Analysis of mobile communication data showed that at 2:06 p.m. the girl's phone was located 200 meters from her house, after which it suddenly turned off. A large-scale search operation began. The police thoroughly searched all the basements and attics in the area, involved dog handlers with service dogs. They questioned all the local residents who could have seen the schoolgirl or noticed something suspicious. They checked several dozen previously convicted persons who lived in the area, especially those who had a propensity for crimes of a sexual nature. But all the suspects had a reliable alibi. Leaflets and posters with a photo and description of the missing girl appeared on the streets. The family actively helped in the search, but it was all in vain. The only thing that could be established for sure was that the girl disappeared just 200 meters from her home. This event shook the entire district. Local residents were frightened and afraid to let their children out of sight. It was especially hard for Georgina's younger sister Michelle. Her carefree childhood ended on the day her sister disappeared. Her mother and grandmother no longer allowed her to walk alone. They personally accompanied her to and from school. Years passed, but the investigation did not progress. 3 years after the disappearance, another search operation was carried out using dogs trained to search for human remains. By that time, few people, except for relatives, hoped to find Georgina alive. Only the mother continued to believe that her daughter had simply run away and would someday return home. The breakthrough in the investigation came with the events of 2016, 10 years after the girl's disappearance. During a re-questioning of local residents, several neighbors spoke about a suspicious man who lived nearby. It was 30-year-old unemployed Ollie K., who often watched teenagers and tried to communicate with schoolgirls while standing near his apartment building. At first glance, Ollie seemed like an ordinary family man. He was married, had 3 children, and tried to create the image of an exemplary father. He was born in Berlin into a Turkish family. After school, he worked as a janitor and an assistant at a construction site. In 2002, he obtained German citizenship. At the time of Georgina's disappearance, he was unemployed, making ends meet with odd jobs and social assistance. He had numerous debts due to his passion for gambling. The investigators' attention was particularly drawn to an incident in 2011. Back then, Ollie lured a 17-year-old neighbor into the basement by offering to sell her a cell phone at a low price. In the basement, he confessed his feelings to her and tried to kiss her, and when the girl began to resist, he hit her on the head and raped her. For this crime, in 2012, he received only a year and a half of probation. At the trial, Ollie claimed that the girl herself had offered him intimate relations instead of payment for the phone, and his family fully supported dispersion. The investigators decided to develop a complex operation to infiltrate agents into the suspect's environment. The first agent, under the pseudonym Hakan, was supposed to pose as a successful businessman who had moved to Berlin and was going to open a car wash. He managed to meet Ollie in a cafe where he usually spent time and offered him a job as a manager at the future car wash. Gradually, Hakan and Ollie became inseparable friends, traveling together on business trips, which made it possible to establish a trusting relationship. The second agent was a woman under the pseudonym Susie, who was supposed to get close to Ollie's family, especially his wife Malek. The couples began spending time together. Ollie's family even trusted the agents to look after their children, which allowed them to calmly inspect his property, but no direct evidence was found. Then it was decided to introduce a third agent under the pseudonym Kara, who was supposedly Hawkins' cousin with a criminal past. Ollie quickly found a common language with Kara and began to show his true colors. They visited brothels together, where Ollie regularly cheated on his wife, and Kara paid for all the entertainment, explaining it by the presence of illegal income. In 2018, the investigators decided to use an unexpected twist, an anonymous call to the police from a person who allegedly knew where Georgina's body was located. Although nothing was found at the specified coordinates, this incident was used to put pressure on the suspect. Kara offered Ollie €150,000 for killing a girl who was supposedly blackmailing him. Tempted by the large sum, which could solve all his financial problems, Ollie agreed and began actively planning the crime. During one of the car trips, a candid conversation took place between Kara and Ollie, which was recorded. To prove his ability to kill, Ollie unexpectedly told the story about Georgina Kruger. He confessed that he watched her every day when the girl was returning from school and was fascinated by her beauty. On September 25, 2006, he asked her to help carry things to the basement, offering to pay her. When the trusting girl found herself in the basement, Ollie hit her on the head. Georgina did not lose consciousness and began to scream. Realizing that the situation was getting out of control, he hit her several more times. Fearing that if she survived and escaped, he would face imprisonment, Ollie strangled his victim with his hands. In his confession, he even mentioned how much his fingers hurt from the strain during the strangulation, a detail that, according to experts, could only be known by the real killer. According to Ollie, Georgina's body remained in the basement for 3 days. All this time, the police and volunteers were searching for the girl all over the area, even searching basements, but for some reason, they did not reach his hiding place. When the search subsided a little, he wrapped the body in garbage bags, then in an old carpet, and threw it into a dumpster. The remains were taken to a waste processing plant, where everything was burned, so they were completely destroyed. In December 2018, 12 years after the girl's disappearance, Ollie K. was arrested. During a search of his home, nothing was found that could directly link him to the crime. During interrogations, he remained silent and refused to give any testimony. It turned out that he had already been interrogated in 2006 as a neighbor, but at that time he denied that he even knew the missing girl and did not arouse suspicion since he had no criminal record yet. The prosecution was based mainly on the confession obtained by the agents and circumstantial evidence. Geolocation of the mobile phone confirmed that on the day of the disappearance, Ollie's phone was near Georgina's phone several times, at 1:14 p.m. m, 2:25 p.m. m, 2:32 p.m. m, and 3:13 p.m. m. Several witnesses spoke about his inappropriate behavior towards underage girls. On July 31, 2019, a trial began that attracted huge public attention. The court was presented with recordings of telephone conversations between Ollie's wife, Malek, which were tapped during the investigation. In conversations with a friend, she expressed serious concern about her husband's behavior, stated that she was afraid for her children, and asked her older son to look after his sisters and not leave them alone with their father. On March 12, 2020, after a lengthy trial, Ollie K. was sentenced to life imprisonment. After the verdict was announced, he continued to insist on his innocence and demanded a review of the case. According to his version, the story about Georgina's murder was completely fabricated to gain Kara's trust and prove that he was a suitable candidate for the role of a hired killer. However, the court found his explanations unconvincing, especially considering the precise details of the crime that he described in his confession. All the years after Georgina's disappearance, her family kept the girl's room untouched. Every year on her birthday and Christmas, they bought her gifts, which they left unopened, hoping for her return. The news that their little girl had been brutally murdered practically near her own home was a terrible blow to them. It was especially hard to realize that the killer had lived nearby all this time and continued his usual life. After the verdict was announced, Georgina's mother expressed outrage that a dangerous criminal who had previously attacked minors remained at large for so long and had the opportunity to commit a new crime. If law enforcement agencies had taken previous incidents involving Ali K more seriously, perhaps the tragedy could have been prevented. The Georgina Kruger case became one of the most high-profile criminal stories in Germany at the beginning of the 21st century. It demonstrated both the strengths and weaknesses of the German law enforcement system. On the one hand, to solve the crime, a brilliant operation was carried out to introduce undercover agents, which lasted almost 2 years. The detectives showed incredible persistence and professionalism, not stopping the search for the truth even a decade after the girl's disappearance. On the other hand, the case revealed serious shortcomings in the system of control over persons prone to sexual crimes. Ali K repeatedly demonstrated dangerous behavior towards underage girls but received only suspended sentences. Even after a brutal attack on a 17-year-old girl, he remained at large, which allowed him to continue to pose a threat to those around him. The professional work of the undercover agents played a special role in solving the crime. They were able to create such convincing legends and so skillfully gain the trust of the suspect that he eventually revealed his darkest secret. It is noteworthy that the confession was obtained not under pressure or threats, but in a casual conversation when Ali himself decided to brag about his experience to a person whom he considered an accomplice. An important aspect of the case was the use of modern technologies to gather evidence. Geolocation of mobile phones made it possible to establish that on the day of Georgina's disappearance, the phones of the victim and the killer were near each other at a critical moment. Recordings of the suspects and his wife's telephone conversations provided important information about the nature of their relationship and Malek's fears about her husband's behavior. This story also showed how important it is not to stop the investigation even in cases where it seems that all possibilities have been exhausted. For 10 years, the case seemed hopeless. There was no body of the victim, no direct evidence of the crime, no reliable witnesses. However, thanks to the persistence of the investigators and the use of non-standard methods of investigation, the killer was still exposed and brought to justice. The tragic fate of Georgina Kruger forced German society to reconsider its attitude towards the safety of children in an urban environment. After this case, many schools strengthened security measures and introduced special training programs for children on the roles of personal safety. Parents began to pay more attention to how their children move around the city, with whom they communicate, what strangers live in the neighborhood. This lesson was especially painful for the Kruger family. Georgina's younger sister, Michelle, lost not only her sister but also her carefree childhood. Constant fear and overprotection from her mother and grandmother affected her development and personality formation. The older brother Tommy, who lived separately, blamed himself for a long time for not being around and not being able to protect his sister. After the trial, Georgina's mother admitted to journalists that the most terrible thing for her was the realization that the killer had lived so close all this time and that she could have met him on the street every day without even suspecting that he was responsible for her daughter's death. She said that for years she had tried to convince herself that Georgina was alive and had simply run away, perhaps to India, which she often dreamed about to become an actress. Reality turned out to be much crueler. The case also had a significant impact on the German legal system. After it gained publicity, a review of legislation on the punishment of sexual crimes against minors was initiated. Many experts and public figures emphasized the need for stricter control over persons who have convictions for such offenses and the inadmissibility of assigning suspended sentences in such cases. Ali K's family, despite all the evidence, continues to insist on his innocence. His wife Malek, who during the investigation expressed serious concerns about her husband's behavior, suddenly changed her position after the trial and began to claim that it was all a provocation by the police. Ali's 3 children found themselves in a difficult situation. Their father was recognized as a brutal killer, but they continued to believe in his innocence. The investigators who worked on the case later admitted that the operation to infiltrate agents was one of the most difficult in their practice. They had to create such believable legends that they could withstand thorough scrutiny from not only Ali himself but also his relatives and acquaintances. It was especially difficult for the agent Susie, who had to maintain close friendly relations with the suspect's wife for many months. The success of the operation largely depended on the correctly chosen bait, the offer of a high-paying job at a non-existent car wash. Knowing about Ali's financial problems and his passion for the beautiful life, the investigators correctly calculated that he would not be able to resist such an opportunity. This made it possible to establish a trusting relationship with him and gradually lead him to a situation where he himself wanted to boast about his criminal experience. Psychologists who analyzed Ali K's behavior noted the characteristic features of a serial predator. He carefully selected victims, watched them for a long time, used children's trust in adults and his status as a neighbor. His previous attack on a 17-year-old girl demonstrated a similar handwriting, luring into the basement under a plausible pretext. Experts believe that if he had not been stopped, he could have committed new crimes. The Georgina Kruger case became an important lesson for law enforcement agencies and society as a whole. It showed that even the most carefully hidden crimes can be solved thanks to the professionalism of investigators and the use of modern methods of investigation. At the same time, it reminded us of the need for a more attentive attitude to the safety of children and adolescents, especially in an urban environment. The memory of Georgina Kruger lives on not only in the hearts of her loved ones but also in the minds of many people. Her story became a symbol of how important it is not to lose hope for the establishment of truth and the punishment of criminals, even if it takes years of painstaking work. At the same time, it remains a painful reminder of the price that can be paid for a frivolous attitude to the first signs of dangerous behavior of potential criminals. At the place where Georgina was last seen, local residents created an improvised memorial. People bring flowers, candles, and toys to honor the memory of the girl whose life was cut short so early and tragically. Every year on the day of her disappearance, not only relatives and friends gather here but also complete strangers who were deeply affected by this story. For the investigators who worked on solving this crime, the Georgina case became one of the most memorable in their careers. They not only achieved the conviction of the killer but also helped change the system of dealing with such crimes. Now the police take reports of suspicious behavior towards minors much more seriously, and a method of introducing undercover agents, practiced during this operation, is used to solve other complex cases. The story of Georgina Kruger will forever remain in the annals of German criminology as an example that justice can triumph even many years after a crime. At the same time, it serves as a constant reminder of the need to protect the most vulnerable members of society and not leave any signals about a possible threat to their safety unattended. The Georgina Kruger case also raised an important question about the role of the media in investigating such crimes. Throughout all the years after the girl's disappearance, journalists regularly returned to this topic, maintaining public interest and helping the investigation obtain new information from witnesses. At the same time, excessive press attention sometimes complicated the work of the police, especially during the secret operation to introduce agents. The disclosure of this crime became possible thanks to a combination of classical methods of police work with the latest technologies and non-standard approaches to investigation. International cooperation also played an important role. German investigators consulted with colleagues from other countries where similar, cold cases had been successfully solved. Today, the story of Georgina Kruger is studied in police academies as an example of how important it is not to stop the investigation even in the most difficult cases. Her case changed not only the methods of work of law enforcement agencies but also society's attitude to the problem of the safety of children and adolescents. Thanks to this tragic case, many potential victims were saved because now both the police and citizens pay much more attention to the first signs of dangerous behavior. Every year on Georgina's birthday, her family organizes charity events to support organizations that search for missing children and help victims of violence. Thus, the memory of the girl who dreamed of becoming an actress continues to live on in good deeds that help other children avoid her tragic fate. Georgina Kruger's death became not just another criminal case, it forced German society to rethink its values and priorities. Thanks to this case, legislation on the protection of children was strengthened, new educational safety programs for school children were introduced, and additional mechanisms for monitoring persons who pose a potential threat to minors were created. Georgina's room in her mother's house still remains untouched, as a symbol of unquenchable hope and love, as a reminder that justice, although not always quick, inevitably comes. Her story continues to live in the hearts of people, reminding us of how important it is to protect our children and never give up in the search for truth, no matter how bitter it may be. The tragic story of Georgina Kruger inevitably makes us think about many things. First and foremost, about our children's safety in today's world. Despite all the technical means of control, improvements in law enforcement, and better education, children continue to disappear. They are kidnapped, raped, and murdered by perverts whom we often surround with an aura of respectability. What can we do? How can we protect ourselves? There are no universal solutions. However, some rules are worth learning. For example, never letting children go to unfamiliar places with strangers. Teaching them not to trust overly friendly adults. Not being afraid to call for help if someone makes them do something uncomfortable. Always telling parents where they're going and with whom. And of course, one of the main rules is being vigilant and attentive parents. Taking interest in our children's lives, their friends, and their problems. Not being too lazy to walk them to school one extra time or pick them up from activities. Keeping track of children's movements using gadgets. Maybe it limits a child's personal freedom, but safety is worth it. Unfortunately, even all these measures don't guarantee 100% protection. Because evil is ingenious and insidious. It hides behind the mask of goodness and pretends to be familiar. Until it catches its victim in its clutches. This is where people around us play a significant role. If Ali K's neighbors hadn't stayed silent about his suspicious behavior back in 2006 and had immediately reported it to the police, perhaps Georgina would be alive. So we shouldn't be afraid to stick our nose in other people's business when it comes to children's safety. It's better to be overcautious than to later blame ourselves for staying silent. And so ends this horrifying, sad, and cautionary tale about young Georgina Kruger's death at the hands of a devious serial killer. This tragedy shook all of Germany and made millions of people wonder, are they doing enough to protect their children? Are they too naive and trusting of strangers? Are they ready to protect what's most precious to them? Of course, everyone draws their own conclusions. And there's no universal manual that can guarantee children's protection from evil. Sometimes terrible things happen even with maximum caution and care. Life, no matter how you look at it, is unpredictable. However, Georgina's story itself is a painful reminder that we live in a cruel world. A world where a predator in human form might be lurking near your home. Or living next door and greeting you every morning. Therefore, we adults are simply destined to remain vigilant. For the sake of our children's peace and future. Has German society learned any important lessons from this tragedy? We want to believe so. At least after the high-profile trial of Ali K., the German government strengthened penalties for sexual crimes against minors. And that's good. Because even the threat of a life sentence doesn't always stop perverts. But the inevitability of punishment will stop many. Law enforcement and civic organizations have also intensified their public awareness campaign. After all, the more people know how to recognize a pedophile or kidnapper, the harder it will be for them to hunt children. Because under the watchful eye of the community, a criminal will inevitably reveal themselves. So let's not be indifferent. Let's not live by the principle, not my problem, literally, my house is on the edge. Because that's how you might lose your own children. And no one would wish that upon anyone. So let's learn from others' mistakes. Let's pay attention to warning signs. Let's watch those who raise even the slightest suspicion. And most importantly, let's communicate more with our children. Because then we definitely won't miss trouble coming. If each of us changes our attitude even slightly after Georgina Kruger's tragedy, may she rest in peace. And may we all have peaceful skies and a safe future for our children. June 2015 was a warm month in the Swedish town of Skövde. Provincial life went on as usual, locals knew each other, children walked safely in the streets, and the biggest event was the opening of a new cafe in neighboring Blomberg. Lisa Holm was born on February 7, 1998, in Sweden. Growing up in a close-knit family, she developed into a determined young woman with clear goals for her future. At 17, Lisa had already mapped out her path. She planned to study social sciences and had dreams of traveling to Australia. Her independence showed early, as she took various part-time jobs to earn her own money. In the spring of 2015, Lisa secured a position at a cafe in Blomberg, approximately 40 minutes from her home. The job represented a significant step toward independence for the teenager. Recognizing this milestone, her father purchased a moped to help her commute to work. However, being protective and aware of her limited experience on the roads, he accompanied her for the first few weeks, following behind in his car as she learned the route. By early June, Lisa had grown confident in her ability to handle the commute independently. Her father agreed it was time for her to make the journey alone. On Sunday, June 7, 2015, Lisa prepared for her first solo trip to work. It was a routine closing shift at the cafe, nothing extraordinary about the day itself. The cafe was busy that afternoon, with Lisa attending to customers throughout her shift. Around lunchtime, her parents visited, sharing a quick meal with their daughter during her break before heading home. The day proceeded normally until closing time approached at 6 p.m. At 6:23 p.m., Lisa sent a text message to her father, informing him that she was leaving work and would be home soon. 3 minutes later, her father received a call from her phone. When he answered, he heard background voices and what sounded like a car door closing. Assuming Lisa had accidentally dialed his number while talking with colleagues, he called out her name several times but received no response. The call ended, and her father waited for her return. The journey from Blomberg to their home typically took 40 to 45 minutes by moped. When Lisa hadn't arrived by 7:30 p.m., her parents grew increasingly concerned. Multiple calls to her phone went straight to voicemail. Her father, fearing she might have had an accident, decided to drive the route himself, carefully scanning the roadsides for any sign of his daughter. When he arrived at the cafe, he spotted Lisa's moped in the parking lot. For a brief moment, relief washed over him, until he noticed the keys were still in the ignition, with her helmet hanging from the handlebar. Lisa would never have left her moped unsecured this way. The cafe was closed and dark. Her father's relief transformed into deep concern. Lisa's mother contacted the cafe owner, who immediately drove to the location. The owner called 4 friends who lived nearby to assist with the search. Together with Lisa's father, they thoroughly checked the cafe and its immediate surroundings. The last possibility, that Lisa might have decided to take a bus instead, was quickly eliminated when her mother and sister checked the local bus stop. By 10 p.m., with darkness settling in and no sign of Lisa, her family contacted the police. The response was immediate. Given the circumstances, the abandoned moped with keys in the ignition, Lisa's reliable nature, and her complete disappearance, investigators immediately suspected foul play. Search dogs were deployed, and officers began conducting door-to-door inquiries in the vicinity of the cafe. Lisa's friends and classmates, upon learning of her disappearance, began spreading information through social media, hoping to generate leads and possibly locate witnesses. The search continued through the night, but as dawn approached on Monday, June 8, there was still no trace of the missing teenager. The morning after Lisa's disappearance brought the first significant development. A worker entering the barn directly across from the cafe discovered a motorcycle glove on the floor. This was particularly noteworthy as police had searched this same barn the previous evening without finding anything. The glove was turned over to authorities by the Blomberg estate's landlord, who reported that farm workers had found it during their morning routine. While Lisa's parents confirmed it belongs to their daughter, the chain of evidence was already compromised, limiting its forensic value. On Monday morning, police made their first public announcement about the disappearance, strategically withholding Lisa's name while requesting information about a missing teenage girl. The investigation intensified as more evidence emerged. A few hundred meters south of the cafe, officers discovered what appeared to be the contents of Lisa's pockets scattered along a small gravel road: a mobile phone case, old receipts, a metro ticket, and pieces of a smashed phone screen. The location was significant. This particular path would have been familiar mainly to locals. The discovery of the broken phone provided crucial insight into the perpetrator's methods. Lisa's last known location, based on phone records, was at the cafe. The lack of subsequent activity suggested either she had been forced to turn off her phone, or more likely, it had been taken and destroyed to prevent tracking. By Tuesday, June 9th, investigators found more of Lisa's belongings: her driver's license and house keys. The search operation was now expanding rapidly. Police established a command center at Kelby Sports Ground near the cafe, coordinating an increasingly complex investigation. The systematic search included emptying mineral wells, examining buildings, and methodically covering farmlands. On Wednesday, June 10th, authorities made the decision to release Lisa's name to the public. The response was unprecedented in Swedish history. Nearly 1,000 volunteers joined the search efforts, making it the largest such operation the country had ever seen. This massive mobilization of civilians worked alongside law enforcement, creating a comprehensive search grid. The investigation took another turn when searchers decided to re-examine the barn. During this subsequent search, one of Lisa's earrings was found near the entrance. This discovery prompted forensics teams to conduct a more thorough examination of the building. They found biological evidence, human feces, which investigators theorized might belong to the perpetrator, noting that extreme stress and adrenaline during violent crimes can trigger such physiological responses. The barn's layout became increasingly significant to the investigation. It wasn't simply an open storage space but contained several rooms, including an office and a milking room. The office provided a clear view of the cafe, allowing anyone inside to observe the young waitresses coming and going. Forensic examination would later reveal evidence of sexual activity on the wall near the window, with DNA matching one of the suspects. As the search radius expanded to 5 kilometers around the cafe, volunteers reached Martork Farm. Here, the investigation encountered its first interaction with the eventual suspects. 2 men approached the search party, speaking English rather than Swedish, claiming the area had already been examined. Despite their assertions, the volunteers' suspicions were aroused, and they contacted police. This decision proved crucial. Near the farm, searchers discovered Lisa's helmet, jacket, and earphones hidden under twigs and foliage. More telling was the discovery of an old wooden trailer that appeared to have been recently accessed, evidenced by flattened grass leading to its entrance. Inside, the space was arranged like an old changing room, with benches and lockers. Most lockers were closed, but one contained old clothes, and hidden behind them, investigators would make their most tragic discovery. Upon entering the trailer, investigators were immediately struck by the unmistakable odor of death. Among the rows of lockers, they found Lisa's body concealed behind old clothing in one of the compartments. She was partially undressed, with a rope around her neck and duct tape covering her mouth and nose. The discovery transformed the missing person case into a murder investigation, focusing attention on Martorp Farm and its connections to the cafe. The investigation quickly centered on 3 individuals, 2 Lithuanian brothers and the wife of one of them. The timing was significant. These were the same men who had attempted to deter volunteers from searching the farm. The brothers, Nerijus Bilavicius and his younger sibling, worked as laborers both at the barn near the cafe and at Martorp Farm. Their residence was strategically located along the gravel road where Lisa's belongings had been found. Forensic examination of the crime scenes yielded crucial evidence. In the barn's office overlooking the cafe, investigators discovered multiple DNA traces from Nerijus Bilavicius on the walls and window area. Cafe employees later recalled seeing both brothers watching them from this vantage point on numerous occasions. In the milking room, a rope attached to a pipe tested positive for Lisa's DNA, establishing it as the likely location of her death. The police reconstruction of events suggested a calculated attack. Evidence indicated that Nerijus had confronted Lisa as she prepared to leave work, likely using his car to transport her to the barn. The medical examination revealed that Lisa died from strangulation, with the perpetrator subsequently moving her body to the trailer at Martorp Farm while discarding her belongings along the way. During this period, a disturbing element emerged online. A YouTube video titled 13 appeared on a channel named Lisa Home, featuring a countdown timer. The video, posted 13 days before Lisa's disappearance, initially caused speculation about premeditation. However, investigation revealed it to be a cruel hoax. The channel name and video title had been changed after Lisa's disappearance became public. Initially, all 3 suspects denied involvement, providing alibis for each other. According to their story, Nerijus had been sleeping at home while his wife prepared dinner and his brother used the computer. They claimed Nerijus later went to a gas station for pizza and cigarettes. However, this carefully constructed narrative began to unravel when confronted with mounting forensic evidence. The breakthrough came when Nerijus's brother broke his silence. He revealed that on the evening of Lisa's disappearance, Nerijus had returned home around 7:30 p.m., covered in dirt, and immediately washed his clothes. More significantly, Nerijus had instructed his brother to provide a false alibi, suggesting that as immigrants, they would be primary suspects regardless of guilt. Further investigation of Nerijus's background revealed disturbing elements. His computer contained extensive collections of dark and violent adult content. Prosecutors later argued that Lisa's suspension from the pipe in the milking room might have been an attempt to recreate scenes from this material. This evidence, combined with the DNA findings in his brother's testimony, built a compelling case against Nerijus Bilavicius. The trial began in November 2015, with prosecutors presenting overwhelming forensic evidence. Despite attempts by Nerijus's defense to shift blame to his brother and explain away the DNA evidence through his work at the barn, the case against him was insurmountable. The presence of his DNA on Lisa's clothing, particularly her underwear, could only be explained by direct contact during the crime. The trial lasted 1 month, drawing intense national attention. On November 17, 2015, the court reached its verdict. Nerijus Bilavicius was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment in a high-security Swedish facility. His legal team attempted to appeal the verdict, but this effort was rejected, seemingly closing this chapter of the case. The Swedish prison system, known for its humanitarian approach, provided Bilavicius with conditions more akin to a modest hotel than a traditional prison. However, in early 2017, he made an unexpected request for transfer to his native Lithuania. The Swedish courts approved this transfer, despite Lithuanian prisons being notably harsher than their Swedish counterparts. His motivations became clear when, shortly after the transfer, Bilavicius appealed to the Lithuanian courts and successfully had his sentence reduced from life to 15 years. This victory proved short-lived. Within weeks, the court overturned its decision, reinstating his life sentence. Now Bilavicius found himself facing the same sentence but in significantly worse conditions, with no possibility of returning to the Swedish system. The case's final chapter came on August 3, 2022, when Bilavicius was attacked by another inmate during a prison transfer. The assailant stabbed him in the neck with a makeshift weapon, and despite efforts to save him, Bilavicius died en route to the hospital. Reports suggested he had faced constant harassment from other inmates, both in Sweden and Lithuania, with one incident involving inmates pouring nearly boiling water on him. Questions lingered about the potential involvement of Bilavicius's wife and brother. While investigators found no physical evidence linking them to Lisa's murder, their DNA was absent from both her belongings and the crime scenes. Their role in providing false alibis raised concerns. Cafe employees' accounts of seeing two men watching from the barn suggested the younger brother's awareness of his siblings' behavior, even if he hadn't participated in the murder itself. The case profoundly impacted Swedish society. Lisa's funeral drew mourners beyond the church's 130-person capacity, requiring outdoor screens to accommodate the overflow crowd. The investigation set records for public participation in Swedish history, with over 1,000 volunteers joining the search efforts. This unprecedented civilian mobilization demonstrated both the community's solidarity and the deep shock such a crime caused in a country known for its safety. The investigation also highlighted both strengths and weaknesses in Swedish law enforcement. While the initial searches of the barn missed crucial evidence, the subsequent forensic work proved meticulous and decisive. The case led to procedural changes in how missing persons cases are handled, particularly regarding the thoroughness of initial searches and the preservation of potential crime scenes. Lisa Holmes' case remains one of Sweden's most notorious crimes, not only for its brutality but for how it challenged the nation's sense of security. The case demonstrated how a community could unite in crisis while exposing vulnerabilities in even the safest societies. The investigation's success in identifying and convicting the perpetrator provided some measure of justice, though the tragic loss of a young life with such promise continues to resonate. The Lisa Holm case fundamentally altered how Sweden views public safety, particularly in rural communities long considered immune to serious crime. The investigation's timeline, from Lisa's disappearance to the conviction of her killer, spanned just over 5 months, but its influence on Swedish society and law enforcement practices continues to resonate. The case highlighted the changing nature of rural Swedish communities. Blomberg, like many small towns, had increasingly relied on international workers for agricultural and industrial labor. While this practice had generally been uncontroversial, Lisa's murder sparked difficult conversations about integration, background checks, and community safety. However, authorities worked to prevent the case from stigmatizing immigrant communities, emphasizing that criminal behavior knows no nationality. The investigation revolutionized Swedish missing persons protocols. The initial search of the barn, which missed crucial evidence later discovered by volunteers, led to comprehensive reforms in evidence collection procedures. New guidelines emphasized thorough initial searches and better coordination between professional law enforcement and civilian volunteers. The case became a teaching tool in Swedish police academies, demonstrating both successful investigative techniques and areas for improvement. The unprecedented scale of civilian participation in the search efforts created a model for community involvement in criminal investigations. The mobilization of over 1,000 volunteers demonstrated the potential of coordinated civilian police cooperation. This aspect of the case influenced how Swedish authorities now approach large-scale searches, with improved systems for organizing and managing volunteer participants. Lisa's parents, while maintaining their privacy, worked with authorities to establish better protection measures for young workers. Their experience led to enhanced safety protocols in rural businesses, particularly those employing teenage workers. These included improved lighting in parking areas, security cameras, and buddy systems for closing shifts. Many businesses also implemented mandatory safety training for young employees. Digital aspects of the case, particularly the hoax YouTube video, highlighted the emerging challenges of investigating crimes in the social media era. The incident led to increased awareness of how online platforms can both help and hinder investigations. Swedish police developed new protocols for handling social media elements in criminal cases, including faster response times to online leads and better verification procedures. The case also affected Sweden's international criminal justice cooperation, particularly regarding prisoner transfers between EU countries. The complexities of Bilavicius's transfer to Lithuania and the subsequent legal battles over his sentence led to closer scrutiny of international prisoner transfer agreements. Swedish authorities now more carefully consider the implications of such transfers, particularly in high-profile cases. In Blomberg and surrounding communities, the case left an indelible mark. The barn where Lisa was killed was eventually demolished, though the site remains a somber reminder of the tragedy. Local residents established a memorial scholarship in Lisa's name, supporting young people pursuing careers in social services, reflecting her own intended career path. The case continues to influence Swedish crime literature and media, serving as a sobering reminder that even the safest societies must remain vigilant. However, coverage increasingly focuses on the investigative successes and community response rather than the tragic details, honoring Lisa's memory by emphasizing positive changes her case inspired. Through all these changes and developments, Lisa Holm is remembered not for the circumstances of her death, but for how her case united a nation and inspired meaningful reforms. Her legacy lives on in improved safety measures, better investigative procedures, and stronger community bonds, ensuring that future generations benefit from the harsh lessons learned from her tragic loss. On April 22, 2024, at 9:30 in the morning, the quiet street of Check Hall Road in Yukon, Oklahoma trembled from the sound of police sirens. A few minutes earlier, the 911 dispatcher received a call from a 10-year-old boy who reported finding his entire family dead. The police officers who arrived at the scene discovered a true massacre. In the Candy family home lay the bodies of 5 people: 39-year-old Lindsay Candy, her sons, 18-year-old Dylan, 14-year-old Ethan, 12-year-old Lucas, and their 42-year-old father Jonathan Candy. Everyone except Jonathan died from gunshot wounds. Jonathan himself died by suicide, shooting himself in the head. For the neighbors and acquaintances, the Candy family was the embodiment of the American dream. Jonathan met Lindsay Terry when she was a young chorister in the church choir. He graduated from Bishop McGinnis Catholic School. She grew up in Prague, Oklahoma. Their marriage seemed like the perfect match. The jovial, witty Jonathan and the cheerful Lindsay created the family many dream of. Their Facebook page was filled with ordinary family photos, kids with ice cream-smeared faces, family picnics, sports competitions, home construction projects. Jonathan worked part-time at the Paycom Center, a large arena where concerts and sporting events were held. He often worked at the home games of the Oklahoma City Thunder team. Lindsay was actively involved in the kids' school life, organizing events and assisting teachers. Neighbors described them as a friendly family, always ready to help. According to one of the neighbors, 68-year-old Michael Burcham, Jonathan loved to socialize and help with various tasks around the neighborhood. In 2022, the couple even appeared in an episode of the program Discovering Oklahoma, talking about their favorite bakery in Yukon. In the video, they looked happy and carefree. Jonathan joked about breakfasts, and Lindsay shared her love for carrot cake. In all the years of living together, the police never once went to their address, neither because of family conflicts nor because of neighborly disputes. Nothing foreshadowed the looming tragedy. The Candy kids were a particular source of pride for their parents. The eldest son, Dylan, had just graduated from Mustang High School in May 2023. He had a special talent for music and played drums in the university orchestra at Oklahoma Baptist University, where he was a freshman. The university orchestra director, Brian Stackhouse, recalled how Dylan couldn't sit still with joy when he found out about his first orchestra solo. 14-year-old Ethan was in 9th grade at Mustang North Middle School and was a promising baseball player. His coach, T.J. Armstrong, called the boy "Sweet Candy" and noted his natural talent and extraordinary energy on the field. Ethan was the best friend of the coach's son, and they often spent time together after practice. 12-year-old Lucas, a student at Meadowbrook Intermediate, was an active child who loved sports and outdoor games. He was often seen at his older brother's practices, where he played with other children. The youngest, 10-year-old son, whose name is not disclosed for ethical reasons, was an ordinary cheerful boy. The family lived in a cozy house on a quiet street where everyone knew each other. Neighbors recall how the children often played in the yard, and Jonathan always found time to help with any household chores. He could mow the neighbor's lawn or help with repairs, never refusing to help. However, behind this perfect facade hid problems that later led to the tragedy. Financial documents found later by investigators indicated significant family debts. Unpaid medical bills, bank loans, and overdue credit cards created constant pressure. Working only part-time, Jonathan could hardly provide an adequate standard of living for a large family. However, none of those around noticed signs of serious problems. Jonathan continued to joke and create a cheerful atmosphere at work at the Paycom Center. Lindsay remained active in the kids' school life. The boys were doing well in school and engaged in their favorite activities. From the outside, everything looked quite normal. According to relatives, disagreements between Jonathan and Lindsay about finances became more frequent. Lindsay expressed concern about the family's future due to growing debts, while Jonathan felt he was losing control of the situation. In his diary, found later by investigators, he wrote about feelings of his own inadequacy to be the person his family needed. On the evening of April 21st, a few hours before the tragedy, Jonathan was working at the playoff game between the Oklahoma City Thunder and the New Orleans Pelicans. Colleagues recalled that he was in his usual mood, joking and talking to everyone. Nothing indicated that this would be his last working day. After returning home, according to investigators, a serious argument occurred between the couple. The details of this conversation will remain forever unknown, but it could have been the last straw. Forensic psychologist Dr. Joni Johnston, who analyzed the case, suggests that Jonathan may have been in a state of acute psychological crisis when a person loses the ability to think rationally. The exact timeline of events that night is difficult to establish. The only witness, the 10-year-old boy, was sleeping in his room with a fan turned on. He only remembers a short sound of the fire alarm at night, after which he fell asleep again. The noise of the fan drowned out all other sounds. Investigators found that 2 bodies were on the upper floor of the house, 2 on the lower floor. No signs of a struggle were found at the crime scene, which may indicate the suddenness of the attack or that the victims were taken by surprise. The weapon was found next to Jonathan's body. The decision of Jonathan to spare the youngest son remains particularly puzzling. Dr. Johnston notes that such cases are extremely rare. Usually in family murders, the perpetrator either kills all family members or touches no one. Perhaps at the last moment, parental feelings prevailed, or there was another unknown reason. According to investigators who arrived at the crime scene, the bodies were found in different parts of the house, which may indicate that Jonathan methodically moved from one victim to another. This is confirmed by the absence of signs of struggle. Probably, family members were caught by surprise during sleep. The investigation also revealed other alarming details. In Jonathan's personal diary, found in his desk at work, progressive depression could be traced. The entries of recent months were becoming increasingly gloomy. He wrote about feelings of his own inadequacy, about not meeting expectations as a father and husband. Financial problems and fear of the future were mentioned especially often. Forensic psychologist Dr. Joni Johnston, analyzing the diary, noted classic signs of hidden depression in men. Men often mask their emotional problems behind jokes and showy cheerfulness, she explains. In Jonathan's case, his reputation as the life of the party could have been a way to hide deep inner experiences. Jonathan's colleagues from the Paycom Center recalled that he always created a cheerful atmosphere at work. He constantly joked, tried to lift the mood of others, one of the employees said. I never saw him angry or irritated. Nothing indicated that he was capable of such a terrible act. However, the family's financial documents told a different story. Numerous unpaid bills, overdue credit card payments, and medical debts were found. Working only part-time at the arena, Jonathan could hardly provide sufficient income for a family of 6. Lindsay, who was engaged in housekeeping and childcare, did not have a regular job. Neighbors recalled that they had recently noticed certain changes in the behavior of the couple. They still seemed like a friendly couple, but something was off, neighbor Rhonda Armstrong said. Lindsay started smiling less, and Jonathan, although he continued to joke, looked somehow tense. The evening of April 21st was particularly important for the investigation. After working at the basketball game, Jonathan returned home and, according to relatives, a serious argument occurred between him and Lindsay. The details of this conversation are unknown, but it could have been the catalyst for the subsequent events. The tragedy unfolded in the quiet of the night. According to the investigation, the first shots rang out after midnight. The location of the bodies and ballistic examination allowed partial reconstruction of the sequence of events. Lindsay became the first victim. Her body was found in the bedroom on the first floor. Then Jonathan went upstairs, where he shot the older sons, Dylan and Ethan. Lucas probably woke up from the sounds of gunshots and tried to hide, but his father found him on the first floor. The youngest son was sleeping in his room with a fan turned on. This simple household appliance, creating white noise, possibly saved his life by drowning out the sounds of the tragedy. The only sound the boy remembered from that night was a short fire alarm signal, possibly triggered by gunpowder smoke. After killing the family members, Jonathan Candy wrote a short note, found later by investigators, next to his body. The contents of the note are not disclosed for ethical reasons, but, according to detectives, it contained an apology and an explanation of his actions related to feelings of hopelessness and inability to provide for the family. At 9:30 a.m., the 10-year-old boy woke up and, leaving his room, discovered a terrible scene. Showing composure unusual for his age, he called 911. The dispatcher later noted the child's extraordinary collectedness during the conversation, despite the shocking circumstances. The first police officers who arrived at the scene found the boy on the porch of the house. He was in a state of shock but was able to clearly answer questions. The officers immediately called for backup and medics, although it was obvious that no one would need help anymore, except for the child. Detectives, examining the crime scene, noted the neatness of the house. There were no signs of disorder or struggle anywhere, which is characteristic of sudden outbursts of violence. This led investigators to believe that the actions were premeditated. However, further investigation did not reveal evidence of long-term planning. Jonathan did not buy the weapon specifically for this, did not make detailed plans, did not leave extensive explanations of his intentions. Neighbors began to gather near the house, hearing the sirens of police cars. News of the tragedy quickly spread through the quiet street. Michael Burcham, a 68-year-old neighbor, could not believe what had happened. I saw Jonathan literally yesterday. He was helping me with the lawnmower, he told the police. He was his usual self, joking, smiling. How could this happen? Brian Graham, another neighbor, recalled Jonathan as a reliable person, always ready to help. He could fix anything, always responded to requests for help. It's just impossible to believe that such a person is capable of something like this, he shared with reporters who began to arrive at the scene. By noon, the area was filled with police cars, ambulances, and news service vans. The boy was taken by relatives who arrived immediately after learning about the tragedy. The police organized a press conference where they announced the first official details of the event. The community's reaction to the tragedy was immediate. Dylan's friends from the Oklahoma Baptist University Orchestra organized a memorial service where they displayed his dress uniform and favorite drum. Orchestra director Brian Stackhouse recalled how the young man could not contain his joy when he received his first solo, he just glowed with happiness. Dylan was a talented musician and a wonderful person. At Mustang North Middle School, where Ethan studied, Coach T.J. Armstrong gathered the team to report the death of their teammate. "Ethan was the heart of our team," the coach said, barely holding back tears. His energy and optimism inspired everyone around him. Ethan's friends, including the coach's son, decided to install a memorial bench on the baseball field in honor of their friend. Students at Meadowbrook Intermediate, where Lucas studied, created a wall of memory filled with photographs, drawings, and memories of the 12-year-old boy. His teachers remembered him as an active, cheerful student who was always ready to help others. Meanwhile, investigators continued to gather information about the family's last days. It turned out that Jonathan had recently tried to find an additional job, but without success. Financial documents showed growing debts for utilities and credit cards. His phone contained search queries about bankruptcy and debts. Friends of the family created a GoFundMe page to support the surviving boy. The fundraising goal was set at $100,000, and in the first days, more than $61,000 was raised. The boy's uncle, Brett Remarowski, expressed gratitude for the support, but noted, "All these expressions of attention make me wonder what will happen when the attention fades and only reality remains." Psychologists involved in working with the boy emphasized the importance of long-term support. Trauma of this magnitude requires years of therapy and constant support, explained Dr. Joni Johnston. It is important not only to help cope with the loss but also to understand what happened as he grows up. The investigation revealed that Jonathan suffered from a hidden form of depression, which is especially common among men. Instead of directly expressing sadness, they often masked their condition with showy cheerfulness and jokes. His constant jokes and desire to cheer others up could have been a way to hide his own problems. Cammie Cruz, Lindsay's childhood friend, shared memories of their school years. She told a story about how she and Lindsay once fell asleep in a treehouse, causing panic among parents, who even called the police. Lindsay always brought joy to any conversation, Cruz recalled. She was an extremely loving mother and wife. Jonathan's colleagues from the Paycom Center were shocked by the events. They described him as a reliable employee who created a positive atmosphere during Oklahoma City Thunder home games. No one noticed signs of stress or unusual behavior, even during his last shift at the playoff game. Jonathan's family released an official statement after the tragedy. "Our entire family has been left shattered and bewildered, with countless questions that we will never get answers to." Jonathan was the one whose jokes and cheerful character made everyone smile. Aside from these events, his children and wife were his entire life. Investigators, analyzing Jonathan's psychological state, noted typical signs characteristic of family killers. Dr. Joni Johnston noted that such crimes are often associated with a loss of control over the life situation. These men often see their families as an extension of themselves, as their property. When they feel they are losing control of the situation, it can lead to catastrophic consequences. The family's financial situation turned out to be more complicated than it initially seemed. In addition to consumer debts, unpaid medical bills and overdue mortgage payments were found. Working only part-time at the arena, Jonathan could hardly provide sufficient income for a family of 6. The Yukon community organized several memorial services to honor the memory of the deceased. In the schools where the boys studied, special places of remembrance were created. Ethan's sports team decided to dedicate the season to him, and Dylan's music group performed a special concert in his honor. The city's psychological service organized support groups for friends of the family and classmates of the deceased children. Such tragedies affect the entire community, psychologist Joanna Smith explained. It is especially difficult for children who have lost friends and are trying to understand how this could happen. Investigators continue to work on understanding the motives of the tragedy. Analysis of Jonathan's phone revealed numerous search queries about depression and financial problems, but no signs of planning the crime. This confirmed the theory about the impulsive nature of his actions. Particular attention was drawn to the fact that the life of the youngest son was preserved. Forensic psychologists suggest several possible explanations, from a sudden manifestation of parental feelings to an inability to harm the youngest child. This is a rare case in the practice of family murders, noted Dr. Johnston. Usually such criminals either kill the entire family or touch no one. The investigation also revealed that Jonathan had recently tried to find additional work. Numerous submitted resumes and correspondence regarding possible employment were found on his computer. This indicated his attempts to improve the financial situation, but obviously unsuccessful. The police found that the weapon used in the murders legally belonged to Jonathan. He purchased it several years ago for self-defense, and none of the family or friends expressed concern about its presence in the house. The tragedy of the Candy family forced the Yukon community to reconsider its attitude towards mental health, especially among men. Local health organizations launched a campaign to raise awareness about hidden depression and the importance of seeking help in a timely manner. Men are often ashamed to talk about their emotional problems, explained Dr. Joanna Smith. They can wear a mask of cheerfulness for years, hiding serious psychological problems. The case of Jonathan Candy shows how dangerous such hiding can be. School psychologists conducted a series of meetings with students and parents, discussing the importance of open dialogue about emotional problems. We must learn to recognize the warning signs, school counselor Mark Thompson emphasized. Often the people who are suffering the most are the ones who hide it best. The Yukon Police Department made changes to the protocols for responding to family conflicts. Even if there are no obvious signs of violence, we need to be more attentive to hidden problems, noted Police Captain Robert Hayes. The story of the Candy family shows that the absence of previous calls does not mean the absence of problems. The local church community organized weekly support meetings for men where they could openly talk about their problems and fears. We must break the stereotype that seeking help is a sign of weakness, emphasized Pastor Michael Green. In fact, it is a manifestation of wisdom and responsibility. Special attention was paid to supporting the 10-year-old boy who remained the only surviving member of the family. His uncle, Brett Remorowski, became the official guardian. Our main task is to ensure that he has the most normal childhood possible, despite the tragic circumstances, he shared with the press. The community continued to raise funds to support the boy. In addition to GoFundMe, local entrepreneurs organized a charity golf tournament, and schools held several charity fairs. This money will ensure his future education and long-term psychological support, explained the fundraiser organizer. School friends of the deceased brothers created an online memorial where they shared memories and photographs. "We want the memory of Dylan, Ethan, and Lucas to live on," wrote Ethan's classmate, Cooper Armstrong. "They were wonderful friends and will forever remain in our hearts." The Candy family case became an important lesson for the entire community. It showed how serious problems can hide behind the facade of a perfect family, and how important it is to notice warning signs in a timely manner and not be ashamed to seek help. The tragedy highlighted the issue of hidden depression, particularly among men. Local mental health organizations began offering more resources and support for those struggling with emotional problems. They emphasized the importance of breaking the stigma around seeking help and encouraged open conversations about mental health. Schools implemented new programs to educate students about emotional well-being and to provide a safe space for them to discuss their concerns. Teachers and staff received additional training on recognizing signs of distress and intervening when necessary. The Yukon Police Department also re-evaluated their approach to domestic situations. They implemented new protocols for assessing the risk of violence, even in the absence of prior incidents. Officers received training on identifying subtle signs of abuse and providing resources to families in need. The community rallied around the surviving boy, ensuring that he had a strong support system. His school provided counseling services and worked closely with his guardian to monitor his emotional well-being. Local organizations set up a trust fund to cover his future educational and medical expenses. As time passed, the makeshift memorials for the Candy family were replaced with permanent ones. A bench in Dylan's name was placed outside the music room at Oklahoma Baptist University. Ethan's baseball team retired his jersey number and hung it in the dugout. Lucas's classmates planted a tree in his memory on the school grounds. The house on Check Hall Road stood empty for months, a somber reminder of the tragedy that had occurred within its walls. Eventually, it was purchased by a young family who hoped to fill it with new memories and love. 1 year after the tragedy, the community gathered for a memorial service. They shared stories of the Candy family and reflected on the lessons learned. The surviving boy, now 11, spoke briefly, thanking everyone for their support and expressing his determination to honor his family's memory. In the years that followed, the boy grew into a resilient young man. He excelled in school and became an advocate for mental health awareness. He shared his story with others, hoping to inspire them to seek help and to break the cycle of silence. The Candy family tragedy served as a wake-up call for the entire community. It highlighted the importance of looking beyond the surface and offering support to those in need. It showed that even the most seemingly perfect families can struggle with hidden problems and that it is crucial to create a culture of openness and compassion. Though the pain of the loss would never fully heal, the community found strength in each other. They honored the memory of the Candy family by working to create a safer, more supportive environment for all. They hoped that by learning from this tragedy, they could prevent others from suffering the same fate. Years later, as the surviving boy graduated from college, he took a moment to reflect on his journey. He thought of his parents and siblings, and the love they had shared. He thought of the community that had rallied around him, providing strength when he needed it most. And he thought of the future, and the hope that he carried with him. As he stepped off the stage, diploma in hand, he knew that his family's legacy would live on through him. He was determined to make a difference in the world, to help others who were struggling, and to spread a message of hope and resilience. He knew that even in the darkest of times, there was always a reason to keep going, to keep fighting for a better tomorrow. The Candy family tragedy had left an indelible mark on the community of Yukon, Oklahoma. But it had also shown the incredible strength and compassion that could be found in the human spirit. It had shown that even in the face of unimaginable loss, there was always the potential for healing, for growth, and for hope. As the years passed, the story of the Candy family continued to be told, serving as a reminder of the importance of kindness, understanding, and support. It was a story of loss, but also one of resilience. It was a story that would never be forgotten, a story that would continue to inspire and to heal, long after the last page had been turned. On April 27, 2024 at 2:54 p.m., a 911 dispatcher in Robeson County received an unusual call. A young woman calmly asked if they could track her location. When the dispatcher inquired about the reason, the woman replied, "I just want my family to know where to find me." After these words, the connection was lost. Around the same time, 55-year-old Johnny Jacobs was fishing on the river in Lumber River State Park, North Carolina. The park's tranquil atmosphere was disrupted by a woman's crying coming from behind a dense line of trees. "I heard faint sobbing that lasted about 2 or 3 minutes," and then it suddenly stopped, Jacobs later recalled. A few minutes later, the silence was shattered by a loud gunshot. The alarmed fisherman headed in the direction of the sound. On the riverbank, he discovered a backpack containing glasses, a phone, credit cards, a small Bible, and documents in the name of Micah Miller. At 4:30 p.m., a kayaker passing nearby noticed a body in the water. The police, called earlier due to the 911 call, pulled the body of a 30-year-old woman with a gunshot wound to the head from the river. In the parking lot, a black Honda Accord belonging to the deceased was found. On the passenger seat lay a case for a Sig Sauer pistol, a box of ammunition, and receipts dated the same day, one from a pawn shop for the purchase of a weapon, the other from a grocery store. Later, a 9mm Sig Sauer pistol was retrieved from the water, its serial number matching the case in the car. The day after the tragedy, Pastor John Paul Miller, the victim's husband, made a surprising announcement at Solid Rock Church in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. "Late last night, I received a call. My wife has passed away. It was self-induced, it happened in North Carolina," he informed his congregation, asking them to quietly leave the church and not discuss the news inside the building. He also added, "You all knew that she was not mentally healthy and needed medication." This announcement, made less than a day after the body was discovered, when the official cause of death had not yet been established, raised the first suspicions among Micah's family. But to understand the full complexity of this case, we need to go back 15 years, when Micah and John Paul's story was just beginning. Micah Miller was born in the early 90s into a loving Christian family. The girl grew up in an atmosphere of faith and devotion to the church. Her parents instilled in their daughter the values of compassion, kindness, and service to others. When Micah was about 14 years old, the family began attending Solid Rock Baptist Church in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. This church was distinguished by its dynamic community, where, in addition to services, a variety of events took place from cooking classes to yard sales. Solid Rock positioned itself as a second home for everyone, so the church soon became the center of life and communication for young Micah. It was here that the girl first met John Paul Miller, a charismatic 28-year-old youth pastor. Despite the age difference, a friendship developed between them. The experienced clergyman paid special attention to Micah, often talking with her after the service, taking an interest in her life. For a shy teenager who was just forming her identity, his support and guidance seemed like an invaluable gift. However, there was a noticeable power imbalance in this relationship from the beginning. John Paul, a married man and father of several children, skillfully manipulated the feelings of the young parishioner. He would shower her with compliments one moment and distance himself the next, causing confusion and a desire to please the mentor. But at that time, the naive Micah did not notice the alarming signals, mistaking the toxic attention for genuine affection. Over the next few years, John Paul increasingly took care of Micah's spiritual life. The girl confided in him her experiences and secrets, perceiving the pastor as a wise advisor. However, behind the feigned concern was a desire to strengthen control and isolate Micah from friends and family. Meanwhile, rumors spread in the church about the unusual friendship between the married pastor and the young parishioner. Some of the older members of the community tried to warn Micah against reckless trust, but the infatuated girl did not heed the voice of reason. In 2015, the relationship between John Paul and Micah reached a new level. At the pastor's request, the 18-year-old girl married his friend Jeremy Dace. John Paul himself officiated the wedding. The newlyweds settled in Myrtle Beach and immersed themselves in the life of the church. Jeremy worked in the sports ministry, while Micah helped in a Sunday school, sang in the choir, and served as John Paul's personal secretary. However, few suspected that the marriage to Jeremy was just a cover for the true romance that was secretly unfolding between the pastor and his protege. Eventually, the truth came out. Allison, John Paul's wife, caught the lovers right in their house. Stunned by the betrayal, Allison and Jeremy divorced their unfaithful spouses the following year and left the church. Only a small circle of the most devoted parishioners continued to communicate with Micah. Most condemned and shunned the young woman, considering her a homewrecker. In 2017, John Paul and Micah got married in the same Solid Rock church. Now the 23-year-old pastor's wife became a stepmother to his 5 children and his right-hand woman in church affairs. Despite the condemnation of the community, the couple radiated happiness and pretended as if nothing had happened. They dreamed of building a new life together and growing the congregation. But behind the facade of the perfect family hid a completely different reality. Marriage to John Paul dramatically changed Micah's life. Now she found herself in the midst of church activities. Micah continued to sing in the choir, did graphic design for the community's needs, and took care of women's and youth ministries. But she was most attracted to missionary work in Kenya, where Solid Rock funded religious and educational projects. Despite her busy schedule, Micah tried to be a good stepmother to John Paul's 5 children. She sincerely fell in love with his daughter Salem, often taking her shopping and doing her nails. The girl quickly became attached to her father's young wife. On the surface, the Millers' marriage looked perfect. John Paul appeared everywhere arm in arm with his smiling, beautiful wife. They led services together, hosted guests, and made plans to expand the church. It seemed that nothing foretold trouble. But behind the scenes of the happy church couple, a horrifying drama was unfolding. From the very beginning, John Paul exhibited pathologically jealous and despotic traits. He controlled Micah's every move, demanding an account of her every minute. He forbade her from meeting with friends or communicating by phone. For the slightest transgression, the pastor scolded, humiliated, and even beat his wife. Micah began to notice strange changes in John Paul's behavior. The clergyman, who constantly condemned adultery and pornography, turned out to be obsessed with sexual perversion himself. The man demanded intimacy from his wife 3 to 5 times a day. When the exhausted woman resisted, he found ways to force her to obey. John Paul even started giving Micah testosterone injections to increase her libido. The shocked woman tried to protest, but where could she go? The church, work, friends, her entire life revolved around the all-powerful pastor. So Micah was forced to silently endure the abuse, hoping that one day her husband would come to his senses. Years passed, and John Paul behaved worse and worse. He humiliated Micah in front of friends and threatened to take away the children. One time, he simply threw her things out on the street. Upon learning that his wife had complained about him, the pastor publicly accused her of having an unstable psyche. This continued until January 2023, when Micah, exhausted by the constant abuse, dared to escape from the church and her husband. She moved to her relatives in Kansas, hoping to start her life with a clean slate. At first, it seemed that the worst was behind her. Micah attended a new church, made friends, and made plans. But soon a strange thing happened. Barely a few months had passed when the woman suddenly returned to John Paul. She left her relatives brief and dry explanations like "we made up and my husband allowed me to return home." This message bewildered her family. They knew how eagerly Micah had been waiting for a new life. Some suspected that John Paul had somehow forced her to return. However, the woman herself never spoke about the reasons for her actions. As one might expect, with the return to Myrtle Beach, the nightmare continued with renewed force. Control, manipulation, and beatings again became a terrifying routine. The desperate Micah no longer saw a way out. On social media, she shared cryptic posts where she spoke in veiled terms about bitter disappointment and pain.
So today my heart's a little heavy. I've had a lot of women that have reached out to me about situations of abuse. And I just want to tell you what a lot of people have told me lately and reminded me, because I think I forgot. I knew, but I pushed it in the back of my head just because of my situation.
But despite all the despair, the thought of salvation did not leave the tormented woman. In October 2023, she filed for divorce again. She began meticulously collecting evidence of John Paul's abuse to use in court. It seemed that the decisive moment in this exhausting war had finally come. Micah had no idea what an insidious plan her no longer beloved husband was preparing in response. In the spring of 2024, Micah was actively preparing for the divorce. She rented an apartment, got a job, and opened her own bank account. It seemed that life was gradually getting better. But John Paul had no intention of letting his wife go. He bombarded her with threatening messages, demanding that she return, promising to find her wherever she hid. One time, the enraged husband came to Micah's sister and threatened to wait outside the door with a weapon until his wife came out to him. Micah was forced to change phone numbers and hide at friends' houses. But even there, she did not feel safe. One morning, the woman discovered that her car tires were slashed. When she had to change the wheels, the mechanic found a GPS tracker under the vehicle. Someone was relentlessly tracking Micah's every move. The shocked woman went to the police again. But instead of help, she heard accusations of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. It turned out that John Paul had already managed to complain to the cops about his mentally ill wife. He even showed some papers that supposedly confirmed her diagnosis. In the end, the perpetrator himself magnanimously withdrew the complaint, explaining that he loves Micah very much and just wants to take care of her. So February passed. At the beginning of March, an alarmed Micah reached out to her sister in Kansas. She wrote that she feared for her life and felt she was being followed. It seemed to the woman that John Paul was hiring people to follow her everywhere. In response, the man insidiously resorted to his favorite tactic. He accused Micah of insanity. But this time, he went even further. He claimed that his wife was suffering from paranoia and posed a threat to herself and others. And then he simply locked her up in a psychiatric hospital. The stunned woman found herself confined to a ward, without documents or contact with her relatives. Fortunately, Micah managed to get out of the hospital after just 2 days. However, during this time, John Paul had managed to remove all the key documents from her apartment, evidence of his numerous abuses. Now she had nothing in her hands that would help prove her husband's guilt in court. But despite the devastating blow, Micah did not give up. With the help of friends, she restored access to most of the documents within 2 weeks and filed for divorce again. It seemed that this time she had finally broken free. The hearing of the case was scheduled for early June. Micah was filled with hope that very soon she would begin a new life, calm, free, happy. She did not yet know that this life would last only a month. Exactly until that April day when a desperate voice would cry out to 911 with a plea for salvation. And no one would be able to come to that plea. April 27, 2024 began quite ordinarily for Micah. Surveillance cameras recorded the woman leaving her apartment around 10 in the morning and returning half an hour later. Then events spun with breakneck speed. Micah went to a pawn shop where she purchased a pistol and ammunition. Then she stopped at a gas station and bought a drink. The search queries entered into her phone indicate that the woman was looking for a location in a national park. At 2:54 p.m., Micah called 911. The perplexed dispatcher heard only one chilling question: "Can you track my phone? I just want my family to know where to find me." The woman refused to answer any further questions. And then the connection was unexpectedly lost. Within minutes, a shot rang out in the park. Fisherman Johnny Jacobs, who was boating nearby, said he heard a woman crying before the shot. He immediately headed toward the sound and came across the bloodied body of a young woman. The police who arrived at the scene recognized the murdered woman as 30-year-old Micah Miller. She had died from a single gunshot to the head at close range. Nearby in the water, they found a Sig Sauer pistol, and on the shore was Micah's backpack with documents and a farewell note to her relatives. In the woman's car lay a box from the newly purchased weapon and a cash receipt from the pawn shop. Surveillance cameras unequivocally confirmed that Micah herself had bought the gun. as well as the drink at the gas station. No one suspicious was seen with her. The police quickly reconstructed the chronology of the last hours of Micah's life. All the evidence clearly indicated that the woman had consciously and independently committed suicide. Investigators speculated that she may have been driven to the desperate act by the unbearable suffering in her marriage and a constant psychological pressure from John Paul. However, there was a lack of direct evidence of his guilt. The cruel pastor had an ironclad alibi. On that fateful day, he was hundreds of miles away from North Carolina at a sports event in Charleston. Numerous witnesses and camera recordings confirmed that John Paul had not left South Carolina all weekend. So, despite all the atrocities, technically he could not have been with his wife in the park, and even more so could not have shot her. By a sad coincidence, Micah took her own life just at the time when her abuser was not around. The news of Micah's sudden death shocked everyone who knew her. People could not believe that this smiling, compassionate young woman, who so sincerely helped others, could have taken her own life. Something about this story did not add up. However, John Paul's behavior immediately after the tragedy raised even more questions. Instead of rushing home or to Micah's relatives in despair, he held the Sunday service the next day as if nothing had happened. And at the end, he casually announced to the congregation about his wife's death. As if it was some minor annoyance, not a life-altering tragedy. The pastor's indifferent tone, his clumsy attempts to tie Micah's suicide to her alleged mental illness, all of this seemed strange at the very least. But investigators did not see anything extraordinary in John Paul's actions. His alibi was solid, so he could only be suspected of imprudence or soullessness. Instead, the police quickly solved the case, recognizing Micah's death as a suicide. This version was supported by the woman's pre-death call to 911, where she unequivocally spoke about her intention to end her life. The history of her search queries about the location of parks, the video recording of the weapon purchase, and the cash receipt from the pawn shop also left no doubt. All the evidence indicated that Micah had purposefully, step by step, prepared for her fatal decision. And judging by the nature of the wound point-blank to the temple, death almost certainly resulted from her own hand. After all, the autopsy did not reveal any signs of struggle or violence on the body. There were also no indications of the presence of an outside shooter. However, the relatives refused to believe this version. They knew Micah as a cheerful, strong woman, full of hopes and plans. After all, quite recently, she had been preparing for the divorce with such enthusiasm, dreaming of her long-awaited freedom. Was it all just an act, behind which hid a desire for death? No, it's impossible to believe. Parents, brothers, and sisters unanimously asserted Micah did not want and could not have voluntarily settled scores with life. They recalled her chilling prophecy shortly before her death: "If they find me with a bullet in my head, know that JP did it." These are not the words of someone preparing for suicide. The relatives pointed to the long history of domestic violence and torture that Micah had suffered at the hands of her sadistic husband. To his obsessive control, persecution, and intimidation, which did not subside until the very end. Isn't it obvious that the pastor deliberately drove the poor woman to despair, and then ran away to another state to have an alibi? Unfortunately, the police did not take these arguments into account. The system does not recognize such a crime as driving to suicide. Even the worst psychological pressure and gaslighting cannot be considered a sufficient motive for murder if there is no other evidence. No matter how terrible John Paul's abuse was, technically he remained beyond suspicion. So, after a few weeks, the case was closed. John Paul was never interrogated. He did not hear a single accusation. He did not even have to publicly justify himself for the years of harassment his wife had endured. The sadistic pastor got off scot-free. And Micah's memory was officially tarnished with the shameful stigma of suicide. Although the police put a bold period on the Millers case, the community was not going to give up. Relatives, friends, and concerned activists continued to seek the truth. They tirelessly reviewed news feeds, engaged bloggers and volunteers to conduct their own investigation. And soon, even more horrifying secrets of John Paul surfaced. It turned out that behind the mask of a pious pastor hid a real pervert and predator. Ex-wife Allison accused him of molesting underage parishioners and a sexual obsession with prostitutes. Several women confessed that in their youth, they had experienced harassment and even direct assaults from John Paul. One of them described in detail how the drunk Holy Father once forcibly dragged her into his car. Under the scrutiny of the public, other dark spots in Miller's biography surfaced as well. It was revealed that even before meeting Micah, he had drawn Allison into a scheme to embezzle church funds. Significant donations supposedly for the needs of the community ended up in the couple's pockets. The scheme was exposed when their marriage fell apart and the offended woman started talking. These revelations were supplemented by journalistic investigations that showed the true face of Solid Rock. Former parishioners recalled strange rituals of humiliation that Miller allegedly used to re-educate the disobedient. Others spoke about financial abuse and pressure from the church leadership. Gradually, a frightening image of a totalitarian cult emerged, hiding under the guise of a home for all. However, the most bewildering information concerned the mysterious death of Christopher Skinner, the husband of John Paul's alleged mistress. In 2021, wheelchair-bound Christopher drowned in the pool under extremely strange circumstances. That tragic incident was written off as an accident. But suddenly, journalists discovered that just before, Skinner had quarreled with his wife Susie, and the reason was her too close friendship with Miller. Of course, all these revelations did not prove John Paul's guilt in Micah's murder. But they eloquently demonstrated his true nature as an insidious manipulator and deceiver. And the fact that such a predator was at large only because of a formal alibi seemed like a glaring injustice. To somehow influence the situation, Micah's relatives and friends wrote an open letter to the sheriff's office and the FBI. They pleaded for the reopening of the investigation into Micah's death to examine new evidence of John Paul's abuse. Activists staged pickets, collected signatures, and involved television. The Micah Miller case was rapidly turning into a nationwide Justice for Micah movement. Unfortunately, law enforcement was in no hurry to respond to the community's appeals. Despite the public outcry and moral condemnation, John Paul remained out of reach of the law. All his alleged crimes had happened so long ago that they fell under the statute of limitations. Formally, he was not even considered a suspect in the case of his wife's death. Disappointed by the system's indifference, Micah's relatives resorted to a last resort. In May, they filed a civil lawsuit against the pastor, accusing him of years of torture and incitement to suicide. It was an attempt to achieve at least symbolic justice and not let the perpetrator escape punishment. But did they have a chance to defeat the one who had not even been overcome by the criminal court? This still remains in question. Despite the bitterness of loss and anger at the injustice, Micah's relatives and friends tirelessly cherished her memory. They knew the world must remember this amazing woman not as a faceless victim, but as a bright, luminous personality, full of love and compassion. In May, 2 memorial events took place at once. The first was organized by the Solid Rock community. At it, John Paul delivered a moving speech, portraying his late wife as an angel who returned to God. Many people cried, some even applauded the pastor who bravely held up in the face of a terrible tragedy. But Micah's true friends understood perfectly well that this was just a mask to perpetuate the image of a holy sufferer. Therefore, the next day, they arranged their own, much more sincere commemoration ceremony on the ocean shore. There, where Micah loved to walk and dream about a better life. Gathered in a tight circle, relatives and friends shared memories of this kind, bright soul. About her sincere smile and infectious laughter. About how she always found time to listen, support, and comfort. How she believed in love to the end and strived to make the world a better place. Many recalled the prayer sessions Micah held for women in crisis situations. Her fervent, inspired appeals to God, full of faith in good and justice. No one could remain indifferent upon hearing her Sinjinda pure, crystal voice that seemed to soar from the heavens themselves. Her girlfriends jokingly called Micah the guardian angel of their small community. It seemed that you could always come to her with your pain, your doubts, and she would definitely find a way to help, to instill hope. Even when she herself was hurting and scared. But this angel, unfortunately, could not save herself from her own tormentor. Some secretly admitted feeling guilty for not being able to recognize the trouble in time. For believing too much in the bright packaging of the ideal family and not seeing the hell that hid inside. Micah's parents did not hold back tears, recalling how they once dreamed of giving their daughter in marriage to John Paul. After all, he seemed like the perfect Christian husband, kind, responsible, devoted to the church. Could they have imagined that in reality they were handing the girl over into the hands of a sadist? However, on this day, no one wanted to give too much energy to John Paul. Everyone understood that evil had already taken too much. Now it was time to focus on the good and light that Micah left behind. And it was this light that they wanted to carry through the years. Months passed, but activists did not stop trying to achieve justice. Loud actions and flash mobs under the slogan "Justice for Micah" swept the country. The hashtag of the same name spread on social networks, under which people shared stories about domestic violence and called for change. The Micah Miller case prompted many women and men to speak openly for the first time about their own experiences of abuse. Some dared to escape from their abusers and start a new life. Others found the strength to testify in court against their tyrants. So, invisibly and quietly, Micah continued to save those who needed it. But despite the noble intentions, the movement to reopen the case has not yet brought the desired results. The system remained deaf to the pleas of relatives and the public. John Paul, although he lost his position in the church, avoided any responsibility for his actions. He still remained at large and even, rumor has it, planned to open a new church. However, no matter how bitter it is to realize, even the punishment of John Paul will not bring Micah back to life. It will not lift the burden of grief from the hearts of her loved ones, will not fill the void of loss. But perhaps it can protect others, those unknown girls who risked becoming the next victims of the predator pastor. Therefore, the Micah Miller case is not over. Until justice is restored, until the abuser is free, until thousands of other Micahs suffer in homes, the fight must continue. And let it be a tribute to the memory of that bright, pure soul who paid the highest price for her desire for happiness. The story of Micah Miller is a tragedy that, unfortunately, is not isolated in our world. Like thousands of other women, Micah became a victim of domestic violence, insidious, toxic, all-consuming. Her abuser resorted to the most sophisticated forms of abuse for years, from beatings and humiliation to gaslighting and psychological terror. But perhaps the most terrifying thing about this story is how easily the sadist managed to hide behind the mask of a respected pastor. John Paul was a master of manipulation. He knew how to inspire trust and respect. And he shamelessly abused this, turning God's word into a weapon against a defenseless victim. The Micah Miller case also exposed another sad truth: society's unpreparedness to adequately counter domestic violence. Too often, victims are left alone with their pain, too often their pleas for help go unheard. And abusers, especially influential and wealthy ones, get off scot-free. But this story should also be a call to action. Society must learn to recognize the alarming signals sent by victims of abuse. Never ignore their words, even if everything looks perfect from the outside. After all, in the hell of violence, there is no logic, fear reigns there. The state and law enforcement, in turn, are obliged to revise their approaches to investigating cases related to domestic violence. The practice of kicking out victims and placing responsibility for the actions of abusers on them should be a thing of the past. Instead, we need a clear algorithm for protecting and supporting the victims. And certainly inevitable punishment for tyrants. If anything good can come out of this tragedy, it is change. Changes in society's attitude towards the problem of violence, changes in church practices, changes in the justice system. and these changes must happen today. Otherwise, tomorrow we will again read in the news about someone's stolen fate and shattered dreams. So let the story of Micah Miller become not just a sad page in the crime chronicle, but an impetus for action. Let each of us think about how we can help those who suffer from violence. Even the smallest step of compassion and support can restore a victim's faith in life. And maybe someday it will save someone's bright angel from perishing in the claws of a predator.